6%, also the biggest gain in nearly 2 years. The total retail sales figure matched the highest estimate in a Bloomberg survey of economists, which had a median forecast of 2%. The reading signaled robust consumer demand that could bolster the Federal Reserve's resolve to keep raising interest rates in face of persistent inflation. And Singapore's latest 6-month Treasury bill or T-bill closed its auction with a cut-off yield of 3.93% on Thursday. The latest tranche of T-bills were around 2.3 times subscribed for the 4.9 billion Sing dollar allotment. The total value of applications in this auction was 11 billion Sing dollars, down from the 12.9 billion Sing dollars applied in the previous 6-month T-bill auction. The T-bill had attracted strong investor interest last year as yields hit multi-year highs, but interest declined in recent months after yields began to come down. And Singapore shares poked themselves out of the underwater territory on Friday to eke out gains, bucking losses across regional bourses. The Straits Times Index edged higher by 0.5% to cap the week at 3,328 points. The key index fell just over 32 points or 1% in an eventful week led by domestic happenings. Now, these included Budget 2023, economic data for the fourth quarter of 2022, as well as January's trade data. On the wider bourse, some 1.5 billion units worth 1.1 billion Sing dollars changed hands as losers outnumbered gainers 278 to 260. And that's your finance wrap here on Money FM 89.3. I'm Chua Tian Tian.
Those were your financial updates from the Business Times. This is Money FM 89.3, Singapore's most influential radio station. Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Mornings on Money FM 89.3. Hope you're all doing well today on this so far nice Saturday morning. We are expecting rain a little bit later. And good morning to my ever faithful friend, Neil Humphreys. How are you, my friend?
I am doing very well. Everything seems to be working. We're happy when things are working. Good morning to our
as
wonderful...
as far as we know.
Of course. It's always a shot in the dark. But good morning to our wonderful listeners on this bright and cool Saturday morning.
Yeah,
great show coming up.
Weather's been nice. The Met Service, I was just reading last night, saying it's going to be less rainy for the rest of the month. So that's kind of good. I mean, it doesn't mean no rain, but it will be much less than what we had, for example, around Chinese New Year.
And I've just checked. The roads are clear at the moment.
Beautiful.
Let's hope it stays that way. The causeways are steady. So it's a very bright start to this lovely Saturday morning. Now, let me tell you something that wasn't too bright. Last weekend, Sunday, I kept my promise. I went to the magnificent Pongal Library.
Yeah.
It was terrific. It was everything you'd expect it to be. The ground floor that focuses on folks with disabilities. Just fabulous. Everything down to the height of the shelves, you know, the ramps for wheelchairs.
They've thought of everything, huh?
Yeah. The book selections is great. Yeah. However, I realized while I was there, that there was nearby a well-known temple that has quite a reputable, decent vegetarian tea house that that people on Facebook had been recommending me to go to for years at this Buddhist temple. Fantastic. I was opposite. Let's go. Me, my wife, my daughter, over we walk. It's unbelievable. There are many, many folks outside, Buddhists and monks and everything. I thought, this is extraordinary. What a
like queuing, right?
Well, yeah, what a place. This tea house.
Which is how you know in Singapore if the food's good, right? You got the longest queues. Yeah.
Exactly.
Time-honored tradition.
I thought, this is the place. I walk up the staircase and people are very courteously sort of, you know, clasping their hands together, slightly bowing, welcoming me. I thought, this is magnificent. I said, where's the tea house? They said, on the 3rd floor. I get into the 3rd floor. It's packed. I thought, this tea house, we're going to have a long queue here.
Good stuff, huh?
Right? But a couple of people in the lift said, where are you going? I said to the tea house. Oh, and very respectful. Yeah, okay, fine, yeah. But they're looking a little bit, and they're wearing their Sunday best. I'm not. T-shirt and shorts. I thought, there can't be a dress code.
What's going on here?
There can't be a dress code for this tea house. I get to what is almost the entrance to what I believe is this tea house, and it is packed inside. It is packed. Someone on the door says to me, oh, hello, hi. Have you come to pay your respects? No, I've come to eat. Oh, today the tea house is awake. Not only is it
second time in your history you've done this.
Anyone who's listening to me and has read my books
knows these stories.
My wife literally looked at me and said, "Not again." And not only that, it gets worse.
Oh,
and I'm
Neil.
being very respectful here.
Yeah.
It was the wake to the venerable master.
Oh.
So it was a very solemn occasion.
Yeah.
But the fact that they respectfully welcomed me up the stairs.
Wasn't that great?
Oh, brilliant. So I did sort of pay my respects. I apologized. They were completely understanding. But what are the odds? 364 other days I could have gone to this tea house. I picked the one day when there's a wake.
Can I just say the odds were 100%?
With me, absolutely.
100%.
I straight away sent a video outside, respectfully away, to my mother saying, "I've only done it again." I've trespassed inadvertently on some poor soul's funeral again. And then I went to Google, and it was a big deal in a way. I was kind of honored to just pop in because this venerable master, he sadly passed away in Taiwan. It made all of the newspapers. You know, I think he was 94. Very well respected member of the Buddhist community. So yes, I made a bit of a blip, but I'm kind of pleased in a way that I paid.
Well, at least you were there,
Yeah, I paid respects of sorts. Still haven't been to this tea house though.
I'm sure the venerable master was pleased that you were there.
Of course,
smiling down on you.
Of course.
Well, I learned a valuable lesson about returning phone calls this week. So my Thursday night was the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert here in Singapore, which I went to. Took my lovely daughter Kate, and we had a great time. And I've listened to Red Hot Chili Peppers music since the 1980s. She last year I found out she likes them as well. Just on her own, she's picked them up, and she and some of her friends.
Fabulous.
It's kind of one of the new cool, retro bands.
Isn't that funny? Because now they're selling the t-shirts.
It's hilarious.
I've told you before, my daughter said, "Look at this cool t-shirt, Blondie."
Yeah,
Blondie,
like as if it's no one's ever heard of this.
But she loves
before.
Blondie. Yeah,
so it's good. And anyway, so we were gonna go to the concert, and on Wednesday, my friend Jeff sent me a WhatsApp saying, "Hey man, you got a minute to talk?" And Jeff and I are great friends, but we haven't talked. Like you lose track over the holidays. We haven't talked in about probably 6 months or so. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I got to get back to calling him." So I didn't call him back on Wednesday, and then yesterday, Friday, I get a WhatsApp from him, and with the header, "You should have phoned me, man," and he sends a video of him backstage at the concert. He had a backstage ticket for me, like 10 meters from the band.
That's
right?
a great shot.
Yeah.
That's a
so
great
the picture,
shot.
I don't know. Actually, I'll show it.
That's
up on,
what's his name? Flea, isn't it?
There's Flea and there's Anthony Kiedis, and
Who was actually quite a good actor, Flea, by the way.
Yeah.
He was in the Back to the Future movies.
He's a character.
He is a character. And I'm surprised he's got clothes on because famously he has played entirely naked before.
Yeah. Well, he and Anthony, the lead singer, were, shirtless, as they have been for 40 years now, or 30 years anyway, in their concerts. So that's my lesson to all of you. Return phone calls. When people say call them, but had he said in his WhatsApp, "Hey, I got a ticket for you for the concert," or whatever, of course I would have called right away.
Absolutely. Similar story to that.
Anyway.
Yes, good advice. Return the call. Second one, dress appropriately. Similar. Many years ago, one of my heroes, I love the Bee Gees. I'm a massive Bee Gees fan. And I did an interview with Robin Gibb, who was coming to Singapore. And I'm not going to lie, it was only an email interview. So I never actually spoke to him directly.
Fair
but
enough.
It was an email interview. And he was playing a one-off gig in Singapore. Robin Gibb does the Bee Gees. This was about 2005. And on the day he arrived, the promoter.
So we're not talking Saturday Night Fever days of
no.
disco.
But the promoter must have showed him the piece, and he said, "Oh, he liked it. Fine, great." It was only an email interview. This is so me, Glenn. To this day, I don't know why I did this. They gave me 2 tickets. I went with my wife, and for reasons I still cannot fathom, I went in the scruffiest tracksuit imaginable. I can only think I'd been to the gym or something. It makes no sense.
You just put no thought into it.
That's probably more likely.
Right. Just like, you just throw on some
So I don't, because I'm at the back. No one can see me. We went. It was great. I love the Bee Gees. He finished with "You Should Be Dancing." Everyone is up and dancing. It's great. I'm just about to leave. Similar to you, I get a call from the promoter. We're backstage. I mean, we're backstage with Robin. Would you like to come down and say hello? One of my heroes, Robin Gibb. And my wife said, you cannot go look at you. I mean, and she was right. I mean, I didn't need her endorsement.
So it wasn't like cool, funky tracksuit.
No, I was a tramp.
It was horrible.
I was a glorified tramp.
Yeah.
And
or maybe not even glorified.
No, just a tramp. Just a stubbly tramp. And I said, oh, thank you very much, but I don't want to disturb him. And I left. And then, of course, sadly, of course, he passed away like 5 or 6 years later.
Right.
There's only Barry left now.
Yeah.
And so, yes, return phone calls, wear the right clothes. You never know. You never know.
Oh, isn't that funny?
But now I just think I should have done it. Who cares? I should have just met him in the tracksuit. Life's too short, right? Life's too short.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I was looking at the list of concerts. There are a lot of concerts coming up. Of course, we know about the Sting concert, and there's a few others that are the big names coming. But there's like 20 or 30 different concerts coming up, including the Arctic Monkeys. Have you heard of them?
Of course, I love the Arctic Monkeys.
There you go. They're going to be.
My daughter played one of their songs. I bet you look good on the dance floor. She did it in her school band.
I think it's the 28th of this month. They're at the indoor stadium.
I like the Arctic Monkeys. Alex Turner, the lead singer, great fun. One of the last great guitar bands to come out of Britain in the last 10 years.
There are lots of folks that are going to be here. Richard Marx is going to be here as well.
He's huge in Singapore. Huge.
I interviewed him in Hong Kong in 1995, I guess, 1996. He couldn't have been nicer. He was such a great guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing the concert again because I've always liked his music.
Well, Richard Marx, not my cup of tea, but there's this middle of the road crooning ballady type music that is so popular in Asia, right? And people like Richard Marx, I really admire because they are so tongue in cheek. They're much bigger in Asia than they are in their own countries. There's a band called, every Singaporean listening will know this. There's a band called Michael Learns to Rock.
Right.
Who
I remember they were here like 5 years ago.
They're like the Beatles in Singapore.
Place was packed.
Right? They can't sell a raffle ticket in their own country. Right? But I think they're Scandinavian.
Yeah. And I went to that concert and I got to tell you, I was bored.
Michael Learns to put me to sleep.
I was bored stiff.
Yeah,
I mean,
not for me.
Literally, I was falling asleep during the concert.
There's all
apologies to any of our great listeners who love the band, but I just was not vibing on it.
Exactly. There's all kind of academic theories. Their English similarities bear some similarities to the Chinese ballads and the Mando pop and the Canto pop, whatever. But there's that guy, Richard Marx. All those guys, they always sell out. They always come to Asia. And the thing I like about them, they are quite tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
But honestly, for me, they could put a glass eye to sleep. They
glass eye to sleep. So where do you stand on the Backstreet Boys? Because they're coming as well.
Preferably on their windpipe. I can't take that joke. That's a Steve Coogan joke, and it's such a good joke. Preferably on their windpipe.
Yeah, they're coming back. They have. I was asking Kate about this, my daughter, last night. I'm like, what? She's like, well, there's like 1 or 2 songs,
Yeah.
And I'm like, you have no idea how huge
and still
they were and are back in the day, 30 years ago or whatever. And even back then, I was never into those boy bands at all.
God,
I mean that. I didn't even get swept up in the moment of everyone, and they have 1 or 2 songs that played on the radio over and over again in the car, that you could always count on hearing. But that's
well, I mean, Take That was huge in the UK, Robbie Williams, Gary Barlow, and it's one of my wife's favorite bands. So I don't mind Take That. I think they're good fun. But you're so right. At the risk of trashing every other radio station, but I will, the 80s and 90s never left.
Yeah.
When it comes to music, it's a fascinating thing. The 60s, parts of the 70s, then you get that Deep Purple phase that's very popular here, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. Then it becomes 80s pop. Rick Astley, Whitney Houston, nothing wrong with that. And then it's early 90s boy bands, and are still played regularly every day in Singapore. And the Backstreet Boys are probably the biggest by far. I don't get it. Backstreet back. All right. No, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there's a whole bunch of bands coming into town, and and some that you never will have heard of. I never have heard of them, but you never know. That could be the band that you're saying 20 years from now, I saw them in Singapore at, the whatever theater in 2023, and when they were nobody, and now they're, huge.
Yeah, well, there's a good example of that. In my hometown of Dagenham, East London, there's a small pub. And when I say small, it's just a local pub. It has no prestige. I only found this out recently. They were trying to save the building, that it was what you said. In the 60s and early 70s, it was the go-to East London venue.
Right.
And the list of people, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, Pink Floyd, anybody, Genesis, anybody.
When they were a bunch of teenagers, right?
Yeah. Jeff Beck, the Yardbirds, Eric Clapton.
What's the name of the pub?
The pub is called the Roundhouse,
okay.
Not to be confused with a famous Roundhouse in London. There's another one.
There's one by the canal.
Yeah, that's the famous one.
Yeah,
where I think the Who recorded a live album.
My cousin
there.
lives like a 5-minute walk from there.
But this is just the equivalent of a Singapore coffee shop. It's just a local neighborhood pub, and anybody who's anybody in the 60s and 70s, T-Rex, Mark Bolan, anybody, all played at this tiny little pub.
Yeah.
When they weren't, as you say, it wasn't Led Zeppelin. Now it was Led Zeppelin. Let's just play a few tunes, see if we don't get booed.
Yeah.
That kind of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Just imagine if you were there, you were the barman through all of those bands, right? On the way up. Extraordinary. And not surprisingly, lots of comments coming in. Rob Salisbury. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, Rob.
Neil. Robin Gibbs with tracksuits or tracky dacks, to use the Aussie, versus a no-show. What were you thinking? Epically funny today. Cheering from Sydney. Thank you, Rob.
Tracky dacks. Did you have a budgie snuggler on underneath?
Smugglers. Yeah.
Underneath your tracky deck?
Your friend was famous for them. Your former Prime Minister Abbott. Your best buddy.
Mine.
You sat
I
there.
interviewed the guy once, but he was not my guy. But anyway,
right-wing politics with him. No,
I held his feet to the fire. But anyway.
I know you did. I know you did.
Yep.
No, that was his thing.
Yeah.
He was a bit of a. This is a terrible comparison.
Well, he was an athlete.
Yeah, and he did a few
right?
of the Putin type shots.
Right.
Budgie smugglers, swimming, cycling. No, there is no human being, male human being, not Arnold Schwarzenegger, not anybody who looks good in budgie smugglers. Not one human being.
If you don't know what those are, Google it. We're not going to talk about it any further.
Speedos.
Than what we've already talked about.
Speedos.
All right. Stanley C. Do you want me to join Kiss 92 or 91.3 FM? I'm not sure what that means, Stanley, but of course we want you to stay right here on Money FM.
Stay here.
Stanley, did we offend you somehow?
We don't play the songs. We make fun of the
Michael
songs.
Learns to Rock. Oh, there you go. The comment above. Michael Learns to Rock is.
I know they are. We said that.
Bad Street Boys. They are good. Okay, there you go.
They are very good, Stanley.
Yeah.
They've been curing me of insomnia for years.
Stanley, at 12:01 today, feel free to tune into any of those other stations and get your fill of Michael Learns to Rock. And
they're all wonderful, good stuff. They're all good. Fuchi Ren. Speaking of, Fuchi Ren has been very. She said, "Morning, guys. Wow, Neil Humphreys from Topayu to Pongal. Only you can gate crash funerals and mistake them for food.
Isn't that the truth?
And with the frequency once every 25 years.
Isn't that the truth?
Unbelievable, Fuchi
Ren, you're hilarious."
And she also says about the K-pop, our children. My daughter is aware of BTS. She knows the BTS phenomenon, but doesn't really do much for her. She doesn't mind one or two of their songs, BTS, but it hasn't really taken on. What about you with Kate?
Yeah, I don't think so. Max, you and Kate aren't into BTS at all, are you? K-pop? I don't think so. Yeah, Max is nodding his head.
Shake of the head.
Yeah, shake of the head. Let's see who else do we got here. Aloysius, good morning. Aloysius, how you doing? He says, I'm with Kiss 92 morning show now. Ha ha ha. Yeah, ha ha. Thanks, Aloysius. That's the thanks we get for being your loyal companion and friend for 3+ almost 4 years.
Okay, Aloysius, I will reenact this sentiment. All you have to do, right, is listen to us.
Oh, wait. He says on weekday only.
I know.
Okay.
But all he has to do is listen to us, and then on a second device, softly play Michael Learns to Rock, Rick Astley, and Backstreet Boys.
Never gonna give you
on a loop, and we've got you covered for the selections elsewhere.
Oh,
I'm going to get fired for this.
Man, what a morning we're starting off with.
It's great stuff. Thanks, guys.
Well, all good. Hey, anything else happened in the news? They had the budget this week. We're not going to go through the budget because Money FM did a brilliant job of covering the budget all week. And if you're interested, there's a ton of podcasts on the Money FM podcast site. and analyzing the budget, telling you what it's in. If you haven't seen it already everywhere in the newspaper and elsewhere online, you can get your fill. So we're not going to go through that, but it was a huge week. I mean, lots of talk about it.
I thought there was one huge mistake made at the budget.
Uh-oh.
Everyone is now on the edge of their seat.
Me too. I can't wait to hear where this goes.
I think they should have made rental prices even higher,
Oh,
just so Steve Okun's head can explode in the studio for no other reason. I just want to see his head explode. That is his hill. That is his hill.
He is we'll probably talk about it in a couple minutes with him, but he did a post off of our interview we got last week, and it got like 18,000 views.
Yeah.
18,000 just replaying the conversation that we had with Steve about that. So,
and at the risk of starting World War III, I would recommend people I'm recommending people go to the feed, because I felt that the comments on Steve's feed were very balanced, actually. For every comment saying, "Oh, it's crazy, I'm off to Hong Kong, I'm off to this country to live in my big mansion," there were many saying, you can still get food for $3 a meal, and you can live a local life, and you can make compromises like everybody else has to.
Right.
So I thought it was a very interesting and balanced feed. See how balanced I was there, Steve? So do go to Steve Okun's LinkedIn page. Yeah. It's all there.
Interesting stuff. Hey, we got a great show today, not the least of which we are looking ahead to the first anniversary next week of the invasion of Ukraine. If we can just kind of bring this back to reality here for a minute, all fun and everything aside. And what a huge year this has been for the world, because that one act has had so many ripple effects with politics, with economics, with supply chains, with food, sustainability, and things like that. So we're doing a mini special on the Ukraine 1 year anniversary. Steve is going to talk about it in just a moment in our international news review, and then in our 10 o'clock hour, at 10 o'clock, we are so excited to have Her Excellency Katerina Zelenko, the ambassador to the Ukraine embassy in Singapore, good friend of the show. We've had her on many times before. And also Samir Puri, who is the author of Russia's Road to War with Ukraine. We've had him on before, too. Really going to be great to have them break down the geopolitical and what's happening on the ground right now.
Could not agree more. Fantastic guests. They'll both offer great insight. And this is an opportunity for our listeners who are watching and listening on Facebook Live. Do pose any questions that you want to ask either Steve or the Ukrainian ambassador or Dr. Puri about the Ukraine invasion, where we are, where it's going, and we'll try to get through as many as we can.
Yeah, great coming up. That's just with Steve Okun in about 5 or so minutes, and then in our 10 o'clock hour at the beginning of 10 o'clock. 10:30, we have a guest joining us from Hong Kong, Kitty Lee from Fleischman Hilliard, and she's going to be talking to us about a brand new groundbreaking survey about diversity, equity, and inclusion across the APAC region. They surveyed 5,000 people across 10 countries, talking about why and how DE&I matter to the general public across the region. I'll be quite interested to hear.
Yeah, I've read some of the stats on this. Very interested. Is Kitty based here?
No, she's based in Hong Kong, so she'll be on virtually.
Fantastic.
Yep,
fantastic.
From Hong Kong. And talking about that, and she did worked on it. And at 11:15, we're going back to the Battle of Singapore and our good friends at the National Heritage
I am
Board.
very excited about this. As you all know, this week was the 81st anniversary of the fall of Singapore. So a bit of a treat. At 11:15, we've got Gerald from our good friends at the Heritage Board, and a wonderful guy. I know the guy, Chang. What a story. A very successful businessman, put all of his own money into that Mint Toy Museum, filled it with his own collection.
Down across from Raffles, right?
That's the one,
yep.
Which I believe is only about 40% of his entire collection.
Is that right?
Yeah, he keeps the rest in storage.
Huh.
The collection is worth millions. And for this particular anniversary, he's got this extraordinary collection. You're like this vintage toy collection of figures and vehicles from the Second World War, featuring particularly on General MacArthur and others. So it's going to be a great chat. They're both coming in.
Wow, wonderful. And then our beautiful places later on, 11:30 today, Neil's going to take us to Fort Connaught.
Indeed. Which is never
newly reopened.
Correct. It's never been open to the public since it closed, long before the Second World War to the public. Very extraordinary, very insightful. That will be at 11:30.
All right, lots coming up on the show today, folks. So glad you're with us here on Saturday mornings, whether you're streaming us on the audio app or on the good old-fashioned FM radio, or with us on Facebook Live, also YouTube Live, and you can also join us on LinkedIn videos as well. So a whole bunch of different places you can join us. Lots coming up after this short music break. Do stay with us right here on Saturday mornings, Money FM. Glenn and Neil.
You're cruising through your weekend on Money FM 89.3.
Money FM 89.3.
Traffic.
And there's been a vehicle breakdown on the BKE towards the PIE after the KJE exit. Roadworks on the TPE towards the PIE at KPE ECP exit. And on the causeways, oh my word, 43 minutes into JB at Woodlands, 17 in the other direction. At Twas, 1 hour and 1 minute at the Twas second link to get to Johor. So maintain lane discipline at all times.
Discipline.
At all times. 27 minutes into Singapore. So keep it safe, keep in your lanes, and keep with this lane. Money FM 89.3.
If you see anything on the roads that we might have missed, you can share it with us via SMS or WhatsApp at 8855-0893. But please send the message through only when you are safely parked. Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3. International News Review.
Welcome back. It is our pleasure to bring on Steve Okun for our international news review. Steve, good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great. And speaking of lane discipline,
yes,
let's go back to last week. American football, my lane, I had Kansas City. Neil
for the Super Bowl.
Neil outside his lane had the Eagles. So I'll stick with the real football and leave the EPL and that other football to you when we start talking about predictions. Lane discipline, Neil. It's all about lane discipline.
I couldn't agree more.
Sorry about that, Neil.
That's okay. I couldn't agree more. I'll just say for the benefit of our listeners, American football is this game that they play with their hands, but they call it football, and nobody knows what it is outside of the US. Just to clarify. Second point I will make is I was so close to winning. I was for once I was rooting for the Eagles. I was so close to come in and gloat. And then there was some lucky technicality at the end.
Yes, a field goal where
Exactly.
the foot came in and won the football game. That was the technicality.
A foot being used in football, that'll never take off.
I have to say, Neil, if as you watch that game, you will have seen that there was a lot more scrum in the football game this year than you might have otherwise thought. It looked a lot more like rugby.
It did.
At certain moments, which don't get Steve started on that because he's got a whole he's on a whole crusade to get that done, get that taken out of.
I'd rather
NFL
listen
football.
to Michael Learns to Rock. I'm just alienating everybody this
No, but
morning.
it was a great game. It was a
I know it
really
was.
great
It
game,
was.
right?
It
I mean,
was.
it's very exciting and very well matched. And congratulations.
Hundreds of people at the American Club all cheering and screaming. It was a great morning, great game, and most importantly, I beat Neil.
I'll give you that. There
we
are
go.
hundreds of people at every coffee shop every weekend watching EPL, but I'll leave it at that.
Unless there's a funeral that would
Yeah, of course. We're started already.
All right, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, for those of you not familiar, Steve, give us a little background on her. She's just announced she's running for president, the first person to announce they are, in effect, running for the nomination against Donald Trump.
Okay, we're going to talk about lane discipline because when it comes to primaries in both the Democratic and Republican side, there are lanes, and you have to figure out which lanes are going to compete with one another.
Okay.
Nikki Haley has no lane. She is not going to be the nominee, despite her impressive background. I mean, she was a very effective governor of South Carolina as a Republican. She has her foreign policy chops, being the UN ambassador, having been appointed by Donald Trump. She can speak eloquently, but she has no lane in today's Republican parties. There's three lanes in today's Republican parties. One is Donald Trump. He has his own lane. The second lane is, I'll call it the Trump, not Trump. Right. These are the people who can appeal to the MAGA voters, who can talk about woke capitalism and talk about abortion and how awful it is, and talk about how awful it is that our country is being overrun by immigrants. And that lane right now, the top of that lane is Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, if he chooses to get in. And there's others who are vying for that lane, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The third lane is we can call the Reagan-Bush lane, the traditional Republican lane, small but effective government, strong national security, international when it comes to trade. Haley's none of those three. I mean, she's obviously not Donald Trump. She hated Donald Trump. She said how awful a human being he was when he ran in 2016. Then she joins the administration. Then she stays silent when on the January 6th insurrection. Then she says how awful Trump is after the insurrection. Now she likes Trump again. So she's not in that lane, and no one trusts her who's in that looking for that traditional Reagan-Bush person because of her flip-flopping on Trump and her dog whistling, which we could talk about if you want, to the white supremacists. So she just has no lane.
That's the absolute great point Steve has made there. He's nailed it as ever. I have been reading about her with a mix of bemusement and fascination, because exactly what you said, she champions the fact that she's a proud daughter of Indian immigrants, but then denies there's racism in the Deep South. She disassociates herself from the Trumpist extremists, but then served him during his administration, then tries to play the women's card to a degree. I'm representing the women's half of the Republicans, but is very supportive of anti-abortion legislation. I came away reading all this stuff, not knowing anything about who she actually is and what she stands for.
And that's why she's not going to win. I mean, if she came out, and there are a lot of people who are in those three lanes but she hasn't chosen a lane. and you have to choose a lane. If you're a Democrat, you choose, are you a progressive? Are you a moderate? You're a Republican? Are you traditional conservative, a Trump Republican who's not Trump or Trump? She's nowhere. And what was really, what talk about dog whistles, so a dog whistle in US politics is when you say something that most people don't hear it, but those who you want to send the message to subtly, or it's typically used in racism, they pick it up. She had her launch led by Pastor John Hagee, a right-wing televangelist, who said that Hitler was a hunter sent by God to drive the European Jews to Palestine, who claimed Hurricane Katrina was God's punishment for New Orleans because they had a gay pride parade, who referred to the Catholic Church as the Great Whore. John McCain refused his endorsement, wouldn't have anything to do with him. Yet Nikki Haley has him lead her nomination event and says, "I want to be you when I grow up."
Yeah,
that's
not just a dog whistle. That's like a foghorn.
Where do you find these people? Seriously, where do you find
well,
these
they're
people?
in every country,
and that's so Haley's just
Yeah.
grasping, and she's grasping. Look, she might very well be the number 2 in the Republican
that's what
nomination.
some people are saying. She's looking for that, a DeSantis number 2, for example, right?
Possibly a Trump number 2, because she's refusing to attack him, right? And when she was given the opportunity on Fox News to say, how does she differ from Trump, she says, I don't kick sideways.
Yeah.
Right. Just a quick curveball from Ian Chang. Let's get our readers involved, listeners. Is Nikki Haley trying to do a Rishi Sunak?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to compare the two parties. I mean, if Rishi Sunak, you're saying he has a compelling life story, he had a background in government, you could step in, that he's a new generation of leadership, and then she's trying to do that, but it's much different to do that to try and get through a Republican primary than it is to get through the party system. So they're hard to do. I'll say that the one thing Haley has going for her, she is the only presidential candidate right now who is born after the 1940s. So,
she's 51 years old.
So
that's good. I think the generational shift is going to be important to some voters, and she will connect with certain voters on that. And just one last word from what I've read, that a big challenge for her is going to be raising money because of these other competitors around. So
and that's why she got in early, because there are a lot of people lined up waiting to see what happens and how it plays out. And there's that huge competition for money. I'll say, hard to, well, I don't know. As you said, Glenn, she can attract some people. She is called for mandatory mental competency tests for politicians over the age of 75.
Guess who that applies to?
It applies to 2 people who are the front runners.
I might not disagree with that.
All right, let's move on. The balloon story that we've all been watching soar overhead for a few weeks now, a couple weeks, is been taking on some interesting side tangents, if you will. The U.S. has shot down now 3 more balloons. Apparently, all of them now, they've admitted, belong to civilian airship use, mainly meteorological, and not anything for spying, except for the first one that they believe still was spying. The U.S. does from Beijing. Now, but China has had an interesting approach to responding, and they have, if you follow the chronology of their responses, they've been all over the place with how they've been responding to this. Steve, take us kind of basically through that, and what does that mean?
Well, the first thing is, I am not taking any balloon trips in China or the U.S. anytime soon. That is a given.
No hot air balloons.
Nothing. And it just, one of the balloons that was shot down apparently belonged to the North Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade.
Oh,
I mean, at this point, no children's party is safe, is it?
Yeah, right.
Right. These Mylar balloons, you're taking a risk if your kid lets go of that balloon. I mean, China.
Anyway.
It's what China's done. Right? Is it started with a contrition. Right? And an admission that, yes, this was ours, and it has now shifted, and the Chinese strategy is the best defense is a good offense, and we are going to attack the United States, and we're going to attack the United States for an overreaction, and we're going to attack the United States by saying, oh my God, look what's happening in Ohio with this derailment and these toxic gases and chemicals
chemical train
leasing out. That's the number one thing trending on Weibo in China is let's talk about how awful the United States is. Domestically, let's talk about how awful the United States is with all the spying it has done. Let's talk about how the U.S. has sent 10 balloons into China, even though there's zero proof about that. And the Biden administration has said that is a flat out lie. So really what China's done is now it's just let's obfuscate and let's attack and let's not talk about what we've been doing in the United States and other countries, maybe 40 other countries for years now, which is violating sovereignty by sending these balloons in.
Yeah.
So does this balloon thing fade away, Steve, or does it just escalate and roll into this ongoing US-China spat? What happens next?
Well, now, we as we learn more and more, and again, of course, lane discipline, right? None of us are balloon experts or military experts, but if it now appears that this was not intended by China to go over mainland U.S., that somehow it got blown off course, and it should have been at 60,000 feet, but it ended up having some mechanical issues and ended up at 30,000 feet, which is why it came to the public view, because people could see it from commercial aircraft from on ground. If those things are true, then yeah, it will take time, but you'll get by it. Hopefully, Secretary Blinken and China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, will meet on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference this week. So there's opportunity for this to fade away and just get back to bad relations as opposed to very bad relations.
A couple of comments. Aloysius Lee, very funny. With the war between the U.S. and China from Huawei, TikTok, now balloon. What's next? Don Pierce, why let truth get in the way of a good rant? Ian Chan, why are they so flustered over a long tech balloon when they are using satellites to pry into each other's backyards? That is a great question.
And Don Pierce has followed up by saying what will be next will be semiconductors and AI. You've talked about this before, Steve, very briefly. I've heard it on many, many podcasts. Semiconductors will be the fighting battleground between these two nations.
Well, it's going to be more than that. It's going to be anything that the Chinese can use commercially that can advance them in a military way. And so it's not just semiconductors. That's the obvious one. But what about AI? What about facial recognition? What about drones? What about all of these other types of things? And that's where you're getting this real battle going between the U.S. and China. China has been doing it for years, where they have fused the military and the economic and the commercial. And that's what the U.S. is now saying, we've got to put a stop to that. That's going to be the next battlefield. It's going to be well beyond semiconductors.
We have to move on, Steve. Let's get into our Russia-Ukraine war first anniversary coverage. We're starting with you, and then we're going to bring in the Ukrainian, ambassador, and Samir Puri, the author of a book on that war. And let's start with you, Steve, and look at some of the business and economic impacts. We've got everything from energy prices over the past year to food crises, mobility, all kinds of things happening. So take us where we are 1 year on, which is the anniversary next week of Russia's illegal invasion into Ukraine.
Well, it has been a utter catastrophe and a disaster in so many ways, the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine. And so you have the humanitarian aspects of it. You've got 8 million people have fled Ukraine. 5.4 million people have been internally displaced. 18 million people there need emergency assistance. Half of their energy infrastructure has been destroyed. 400,000 businesses lack power. How are you going to pay for all of this? And it's only been a year. So how are you going to do this reconstruction? And what is the role of government's going to be? What is the role of financial aid going to be? What is the role of business community and the financial sector coming in to help Ukraine rebuild once it can? And so the Ukraine's government assesses the cost of recovery at nearing $1 trillion in the hundreds of billions right now. we talk about, in this part of the world, in Vietnam, but especially Cambodia, Laos, all the minefields that had to be cleared after the war. Ukraine is now one of the world's largest minefields. How is that going to be cleared? How many people are going to unfortunately die or get injured because the minefields in Ukraine that's 4 times the size of Switzerland?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
160,000 square kilometers have been mined.
Holy cow.
So you've got all of this that has to get addressed after the war. And we don't know when the war is going to end because Putin is just he doesn't care how many of his own citizens die. He doesn't care what's going to happen to his people. And when your leader doesn't care what's going to happen to your own people, how do you beat him?
Bringing it back to Singapore and the region, you involved a lot of international businesses with McClarty Associates. You sit on a lot of panels, get involved with some think tanks. What is the mood? What are people talking about? Do we see an end game here? Is it just miserable? It's just going to endure? What is the general consensus in and around Southeast Asia?
Well, I would say the general consensus is that no one knows how this is going to end. It is, if you would say it hasn't been, the impacts haven't been felt as much. There was a huge worry about energy security. There was a huge worry about food security. Some of that has been able to get addressed in part because the weather was warmer and you had a warmer winter in Europe, and that helped. But I would say the things that you really worry about here is, what is China going to do? For a year now, China has not gone in and aided Russia in the way that it might have done so. If China is going to aid Russia with military support, and then the US sanctions China, and the EU sanctions China, and Japan and Korea sanction China, then what's going to happen to business here? What is going to happen to investment here? So that was the real short-term worry that people were focused on in terms of what is China going to do, and what is the coalition against Russia going to do if China jumps in. That is still, it's not as concerned. People think that maybe that's not going to happen because China hasn't given that blank check to Putin, that this friendship isn't unlimited. But what happens if China does step in? So that's a real concern.
Yeah. We don't know about that, if it's going to happen or when, purely speculative. But when we look at just the disruption to people, we've got the refugee crisis that's happening across Poland and other countries in the region there. That alone has been so disruptive on so many levels, not the human level first and foremost, right? But what that's then done to business, those people that were running businesses, were involved in business, now they're on the move, right? And then when you look at the countries that are taking in the refugees, how that's impacting them. How do we ever, you mentioned numbers before, maybe $1 trillion worth to rebuild. We don't know what that number is, but how do we ever quantify the broad impact of this, even assuming it ended tomorrow?
Well, let's talk about Russia too, because you have anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million Russians who have left because they don't support what Putin is doing, or they don't want to get called up. Well, you know who's left Russia? I mean, these are people with the money and the education and the businesses, and they've all fled. So Russia is losing its best people who can help that country move forward. They've lost all of those, the engineers, all the people who do, IT, all those people who are brilliant.
Big brain drain. Huh?
There's a huge brain. So the people from Ukraine will presumably go back, but the people from Russia might not go back. And the longer this goes on, and so you've left Russia, now you've got your kids in school in Thailand, or you've got your kids in school in Indonesia, or you've got your kids in school in Dubai. Do you ever go back? The longer you're out, the more you get ingrained into your new country. So this brain drain is going both from Ukraine out and from Russia out, and it's going to impact those countries, both of them. The longer it goes, the worse the impact will be.
Speaking of brain drain, talk about the money drain. Don Pierce has made an interesting point. Some governments are seizing funds from sanctioned oligarchs and redirecting the funds to the Ukraine. Have you heard about that? Will it make any difference?
It won't make, I mean, yes, it will make a difference to the oligarchs who are losing all their money, right? But I mean, this is, and it's the right thing to do. It is, there are legal issues in how you do it. When you seize property, where does the money go, and all of those issues. And so it sends a message to the oligarchs that they should not be supporting Putin, but it's not going to help in terms of what because the money that's needed is so
of course.
so much. But yeah, it's having all of these effects on Russia and who they're going to support and how they should support.
Them. Do you feel like the international community has been very much together on this? Is there any way from your perspective, what you know, that they can ramp up even more on the sanctions to put even more pressure on Russia, or have they done kind of what they can do from what you know of the situation?
What it seems is, so long as China doesn't have sanctions, so long as India doesn't have sanctions, so long as they're buying the oil, then there's only so much that the rest of the world can do. So I don't know how much more sanctions are going to impact it. I saw very interesting, like a historian had this summary of where the war is. The synopsis is: Ukraine is winning the war on Twitter, but Russia is winning the war on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And the question is, so long as Russia is going to win the war on the battlefield, it doesn't matter what happens elsewhere. We're going to be stuck in this awful stalemate that's going on right now. Then the brunt of it being borne by, of course, the amazing people in Ukraine and the heroic people in Ukraine. And where do you go next? So far, the West has stayed united. It's been a year. The Joe Biden, it's I think unquestionably his greatest foreign policy achievement is to keep the U.S. and the West fully into Ukraine, to give them more and more and more when it comes to military, to give them more and more and more when it comes to financing. Will the U.S. be able to hold that? That is a question going forward for the next year. Now that you have the Republicans in the House, you have Nikki Haley, who's very pro-Ukraine, running for president. You have Donald Trump, who is not. You have Republicans in the House who are not. Is Biden going to be able to keep the country united? Hopefully he can, because without it, what's going to happen with the rest of the world when it comes to funding Ukraine? Yeah. So a lot to think about in the next year as to how what happens.
But just jumping briefly, Steve, on that point, Zelensky has asked for tanks. Now he's asking for planes. Putin is not going to stop. He's not going to suddenly pull out his troops. When is enough going to be enough? At what point does the international community have to go, for want of a better word, all in? Or they just keep going as it is and hoping this thing will peter out, which it clearly won't?
Well, all in problem is that ends in a nuclear war.
Understand.
Which is why no one wants to get to all in. And so where is the line? I mean, it used to be, okay, the line was, we're not going to give missiles that can hit Russian troops. And then the West did. We're not going to give tanks. And then the West did. Now the line is no, F-16s or fighter jets. Is that line going to change? What happens? So you've got, it's terrible now. It can get worse. And if is the Ukraine going to change its position to say we need to get all of our territory back, including Crimea, which Putin took years ago, or is Ukraine going to say, okay, we're going to have to trade some land, but we need some security assurances, and can we get into the EU? How long is Putin going to continue to take his country down a path of destruction, including hundreds of thousands of lives that are getting lost, Russian soldiers, and it's going to continue? That's the problem. We don't know where it ends, and both sides. I mean, and part of it is, what is Ukraine going to? How is Ukraine going to consider victory? What does Putin need to claim victory? Both sides need to claim victory on this, and neither of them are setting it up in a way that's possible, that both can do it.
Well, do stay with us, and thank you, Steve, for that analysis. Just after the top of the hour news, weather, and sport, we're going to have the Ukraine ambassador to Singapore, Katerina Zelenko, and Samir Puri the author of Russia's Road to War with Ukraine, to get their analysis as well. Steve, thanks again. Appreciate it.
And just shout out to Ava Ho and the shirts that she's selling here in Singapore, DOTR, where the funding is going to Ukraine. So great work here in Singapore to support. So want to thank her for that, and of course, look forward to your interview with Ambassador Zelensky, who has been doing
Zelenko,
who's been
not President Zelensky.
Right,
we're hoping to get him on too,
he's
but
coming on next week.
that's not confirmed.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks so much, Steve.
International News Review.
on luxury cars and million-dollar properties. In travel news, Singapore Airlines named the 2023 Airline of the Year by trade publication Air Transport World. The publication lauded Singapore Airlines' rapid and decisive response to COVID
Tonight of 24 degrees, much the same forecast for tomorrow. But good news is the Met Service says that we are expecting a little less rain over the rest of February. Enjoy your Saturday. That's your Money FM weather.
Traffic.
And there is a lot of traffic at the causeway, folks. Let's start there. It's 1 hour, almost 1 hour to get into the JB at Woodlands and 17 into Singapore. At Tuas, it's even longer, 55 minutes into 1 hour into Tuas. 32 minutes Singapore. And on the roads, roadworks all over the island. PIE towards Changi Airport after Lornie Road, avoid lane 3. On New Upper Changi Road towards the city after Bedok Road, avoid left lane. And also on the ECP towards Changi Airport after Bayshore, avoid lane 3. Eyes on the road and ears with us right here on Money FM 89.3. That's your traffic.
If you see anything on the roads that we might have missed, you can share it with us via SMS or WhatsApp at 8855-0893. But please send the message through only when you are safely parked. Helping you grow your money on Money FM 89.3. Money FM 89.3. Financial updates from the Business Times.
I'm Chua Tian with some of the market stories that made the headlines this week. U.S. retail sales rose in January by the most in nearly 2 years. According to data from the Commerce Department, the value of overall retail purchases increased 3% in a broad advance after a 1.1% drop in the prior month. That's the largest increase since March 2021. Excluding gasoline and autos, retail sales rose 2.6%, also the biggest gain in nearly 2 years. The total retail sales figure matched the highest estimate in a Bloomberg survey of economists, which had a median forecast of 2%. The reading signaled robust consumer demand that could bolster the Federal Reserve's resolve to keep raising interest rates in face of persistent inflation. And Singapore's latest 6-month Treasury bill or T-bill closed its auction with a cut-off yield of 3.93% on Thursday. The latest tranche of T-bills were around 2.3 times subscribed for the 4.9 billion Sing dollar allotment. The total value of applications in this auction was 11 billion Sing dollars, down from the 12.9 billion Sing dollars applied in the previous 6-month T-bill auction. The T-bill had attracted strong investor interest last year as yields hit multi-year highs, but interest declined in recent months after yields began to come down. And Singapore shares poked themselves out of the underwater territory on Friday to eke out gains, bucking losses across regional bourses. The Straits Times Index edged higher by 0.5% to cap the week at 3,328 points. The key index fell just over 32 points or 1% in an eventful week led by domestic happenings. Now, these included Budget 2023, economic data for the fourth quarter of 2022, as well as January's trade data. On the wider bourse, some 1.5 billion units worth 1.1 billion Sing dollars changed hands as losers outnumbered gainers 278 to 260. And that's your finance wrap here on Money FM 89.3. I'm Chua Tian Tian.
Those were your financial updates from the Business Times. This is Money FM 89.3, Singapore's most influential radio station.
At IDP, our commitment is your education. We represent the largest number of overseas universities from Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, the UK, and Canada, including the world's most renowned universities. Come down to IDP Study Abroad Education Fair, 25th to 26th February at Suntec Convention Summit 1 to meet over 50 university representatives, enjoy free informative seminars, and submit your application to win shopping vouchers. Places are limited, so register now at idp.com/Singapore.
What are you searching for?
Cash.
In your documents?
In my insurance documents. Instead of surrendering, I can sell my insurance policies to Reps Holdings for higher value.
Wow! Sell them to Reps Holdings?
Yes, they're the most reliable and a trusted pioneer in the industry. What are you searching for?
My insurance documents.
Just call 6221-4771 to get a free quote with an awesome service.
What is the number again?
Call 6221-4771 now.
Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3.
Good morning and welcome back to Saturday Mornings on Money FM 89.3. It is 10:08 on your Singapore Saturday morning. Expecting some rain a little bit later today. Not too bad right now. Island looks fairly clear. Neil joining in, and we are really excited to have that first opening segment with our Ukraine war 1-year anniversary special with Steve, talking about some of the economic impacts, not only in Europe, but obviously into Asia as well.
Yeah, I'd say humbled. Also humbled with the guests we've got about to come on. Obviously, the Ukrainian ambassador and Dr. Samir Puri. Yeah, I just watched this 3-part documentary called "The Putin versus the West" on the BBC. It's probably the most depressing documentary I've seen in recent times, for all the obvious reasons that we'll get into later on. Yeah, 1 year. I never thought we'd be doing this 1 year on, but here we are.
Wide World on Money FM 89.3.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is saying that Germany will soon be deploying its first Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Speaking at the annual Munich Security Conference, just days before the first anniversary of Russia's invasion this coming week, he is calling on allies to not only expect a long war, but to also contribute as well. There's some 30 European heads of state, as well as Secretary of State Anthony Blinken from the U.S. are joining in those meetings. Let's bring on now the ambassador to Ukraine here in Singapore, Katerina Zelenko, to start our first anniversary coverage right here, right now on Money FM. Katerina, great to have you with us this morning. Yeah, we've had you on so many times over this past year, always hoping that we wouldn't be here a year later, and here we are.
Yeah, that's the reality. Looks like it's been a year of revelation, rethinking of many things, not only in Ukraine, but also in Europe and in the world. And even for Putin, it was kind of an eye-opener. He miscalculated so many things. He could not imagine that the resilience in Ukraine would be so strong, that support from our partners and allies will come at once, and that is something that gave Ukraine strength. But again, we need to get real. There is still a long road ahead of us, and for my country and for people of Ukraine, for many of them, it's been quite a living hell, because every day you live with the thoughts that something can happen, so you can never feel safe and you can never secure safety for your children.
Ambassador, let's stay with the positive, hopeful aspects of it first. I mean, a year ago, Putin could not have imagined that A, Zelensky would have survived or not have been captured, B, that he would become the international figure, galvanizing figure that he's become, C, that he's giving addresses at the British Parliament, the European Union, with the entire support of the international community. He didn't expect that to happen. Obviously, you hope for that. How do you still find hope now?
Oh, you know, we are a nation of people who are actually optimists. Ukrainians have always been strong through their optimistic thoughts that always accompany them, actually, and that's something that helps. But you know, hope looks like the history takes its logical course. It means that we do not only withstand this aggression, we also liberate our territories sooner rather than later. And of course, this circle, and the war is always like a circle, will end with the punishment of the aggressor country. Because if the perpetrator cannot be brought to account, it means that no one can feel safe nowhere. And we need to realize what is actually our vision of the world we want to live in. If we want to live in the world where the might is right is one thing, then there is going to be a complete upheaval. Or we want to live in the world where everyone abides by the rules, and we know that we could at least secure a predictable security environment for the future generations to come.
We're joined for our Ukraine War first anniversary special here on Saturday mornings, Money FM 89.3, by Katerina Zelenko, the ambassador to Ukraine, to Singapore, based here in Singapore. And let's talk about the people for a moment. We've got tens of millions of people on the move who have gone to Poland, who have gone elsewhere, or who are just internally displaced. What are you hearing from your diplomatic sources, your family, your friends back in Ukraine. How is everybody holding up?
It is quite similar, notwithstanding the geographic location of any region in Ukraine. If you speak with your friends, if you speak with your colleagues, everyone lives under the circumstances of the war. It means that you have to be every day prepared to go to the basement if you hear the air raid sirens. And over the last year, there have been around 15,000 air raid sirens in Ukraine, which means that so many times people had to hide somewhere because otherwise you do not know what's going to happen next. But it's like not only enduring all these terrible days of war, but it's also like being resistant all time because everyone is fighting. Everyone has his own front. Someone has to perform his daily activities and to work. Someone has to help the volunteer groups to provide food or something for the internally displaced people. So everyone really tries to do his or her part for our safety. And that is something that makes us strong. In fact, we are a 40 million army trying to resist this formidable enemy that one day will be defeated.
Yeah.
Ambassador, your resistance has been so phenomenal that you said right there, it has become a way of life. The downside to that is it's almost being taken for granted by the international media, meaning that when the war started, it led the news every day. Then it dropped to second, then it dropped to third. And now on most days, most international coverage, it's often fourth or fifth on the news cycle now because it has become almost a way of life for everybody. How do we change that? How do we make sure that this invasion stays front and center?
Yes, there's some certain deja vu with 2014 when at the very beginning, Ukraine was all time in the headlines. And then slowly you could see less and less news on that while people kept dying in Donbass and the war was ongoing. To prevent it this time, I think it's important for us just not to ask Ukraine all the time when the war is going to be over, but to ask what can be done to help Ukraine win this war. And I think everyone is interested that Ukraine wins this war because then we will see that justice prevails. What can be done? For big courses, sometimes even small gestures matter. If you just talk to people whom you know, if you just contact the editors or write a letter, or you put a sticker on your computer, or just buy a Ukrainian merch and wear it, all that can help just to keep the situation and the war against Ukraine in the loop. By the way, the proper wording matters too. We do not speak about the war in Ukraine or Ukraine war or Ukraine crisis. It is war against Ukraine, and it's very important not to play in the hands of the Russian narratives.
Yeah. When you look at the future, and what are you hearing? Some of the best guesses. We talked about a possible $1 trillion worth of rebuilding and damage that's going to need to be done. Are there any sort of initial plans of how Ukraine would approach that rebuilding of the country? I know you've had to do some rebuilding already just to get infrastructure back up and running and things like that. What is the foreign policy element of this? What does that look like from your perspective? I don't want to put the cart too much in front of the horse, but it is a reality, and it's something that's going to be such a massive challenge that even right now, the rebuilding you're doing, I'm sure, is taking on its own challenges. What could that possibly look like?
Yeah, you're making a good point, Glenn, because actually, yes, Ukraine is going to become one of the biggest reconstruction projects in Europe after the war is over, and we have really started the process of reconstruction already. But we always need to keep in mind the magnitude of this international armed conflict. 77,000 of facilities have been destroyed in Ukraine, 49,000 of residential houses. It's really a huge amount. 1/3 of the territories is mined at the moment. They need the mining. So there's so much that has to be done. Yes, in the small towns like Bucha, there are some streets that you would not recognize because they have really been rebuilt already, because the residents of the towns
That's right.
have really put all the efforts to try at least to reconstruct the cities and the roads. But still, there's a lot of work that we have in front of us, and we are really grateful to many countries, to our partners who have already committed to supporting Ukraine in its rebuilding efforts. I think we really should not wait. We should start it now, because, wars, it's all about people. And so people who endure all this terrible conflict and that reality, and they need to have homes, they need to see it, at least to see that there are better days ahead of them.
Yeah, Ambassador Zelenko, we want to stay with you, of course. We do want to bring in Samir Puri, who is the author of Russia's Road to War with Ukraine, the invasion amidst the ashes of empires. That book came out last year. And we talked with you last year about your book, Samir. A pleasure to welcome you into the studio as well. A year on, what are your thoughts based on the book you wrote and the predictions you were making and the observations you were making? What are you seeing now of how this has progressed?
Well, thanks very much for having me. Great to be in the studio. I still think there's a bit of disbelief that here we are sitting in Singapore talking about the war in Ukraine. This, I still can't get over, the fact that this war in Europe has had such global resonance. I also can't get over in my head the scale of the tragedy. And I think when I think of the Ukraine war, the first thing I think of is tragedy. Having lived in Donbass, having friends who fled there, friends who are Ukrainian, who are still living under difficult situations. The best sort of estimates that we've heard from Mark Milley, a senior US general, is 100,000 Ukrainian service personnel casualties and many tens of thousands of civilians dead, according to the UN. It really is an immense tragedy, and it's had such disruptive impact around the world. That's not going to go away, that disruptive impact. That's the important thing. Just in terms of where I feel we are a year on in, it feels like we're in the middle of this. I think we're not at the beginning, we're not at the end. It feels like we're very much in the middle, and we don't know how long this middle part will go on for. I think a lot of our questions will be answered over the next few months in terms of how the battlefield develops, when Ukraine receives the military assistance from foreign countries, the tanks we've all been hearing about in the press. And also Russia makes its moves as well, because it's mobilized so many additional personnel last year, albeit of very varying quality. But both sides are committed. If I take a sort of neutral perspective, both sides are committed to their own conception of their war aims. Ukraine's, of course, are very just to defend their territory, to recapture it. Russia's, from a different century, imperial conquest is still Putin's obsession. And we just don't really know how it's going to develop on the battlefield. Just to sort of wrap all that up, the Ukrainians have the sort of the justice of their cause. They have great leadership. They have so much goodwill internationally. But ultimately, they are fighting on their own, albeit with a lot of material assistance. The Russians have got a lot of numbers on their side as well. I wouldn't make any predictions as to what's going to happen, but I send my goodwill to Ukraine, and I hope they're able to recapture as much of their territory as possible.
Let's stay with that, Samir, for a moment. You wrote the other book, of course, The Great Imperial Hangover, which encapsulates almost the mindset, you could argue, of Putin. Let's just go back a little bit, because you do talk about this in your books. He wasn't stopped at Crimea. When Syria came along, he warned the West not to send troops into a foreign country. Then he did it anyway, and he got away with it, if you like. So he didn't stop at Crimea. He didn't stop at Syria. Now he's in Ukraine. He talks constantly about Mother Russia. This is taking Russia back to its natural borders of the Soviet Union. As you said correctly, it's become his obsession. He will not stop, as you've alluded to in your books. So where does this end?
Well, it's a really important sequence of events that you just presented, Neil. And, in some respects, he is a gambler who is intoxicated by his military successes. This is the biggest gamble of his career compared to the amount of resources the Russians have sort of invested in this. But I just want to point out something that the ambassador mentioned earlier about 2014-15. That's the year I was there, when MH17 was shot down. I was working as a ceasefire monitor. And that year I was there, sort of summer 2014 to end of 2015, Ukraine was really high in the news agenda. It was international news. It was making the news. And then it tailed off. And the question you've asked, Neil, is how does this end? Putin is calculating that international patience and attention does tail off.
Exactly.
And one quick comment on this. The US has given very generously $30 billion in security assistance in the last 12 months. 2 billion in the previous 8 years, I think it is. There is a question as to how long the US can keep funding that amount of security assistance. So I do think we are in a little bit of a race against time. I don't think time is infinite here, because Putin's obsessions are pretty fixed. And he's 70, coming to 71. He's thinking of his own legacy in imperial terms, thinking of himself as a czar. There's no talking him out of that mindset. So I think we just have to see how this year plays out.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may, on that. So the simplistic argument would therefore be remove Putin, remove the problem. How deep is this, as you call it, great imperial hangover mindset within Russia still? Does the problem go away with Putin, or does the mindset remain?
I think the problem doesn't go away. And a quick historical reminder, Putin replaced Yeltsin partly on the basis that he could win the Chechnya war back in the 1990s when Yeltsin lost. There's a possibility that a further right-wing Russian politician tries to embody this mindset and says, you failed in Ukraine militarily, I'm going to take over, do the job properly. That's a bit of a warning from Russia's recent history about the question you posed.
We're talking with Samir Puri, the author of Russia's Road to War with Ukraine, Invasion Amidst the Ashes of the Empires, and also Ambassador Katerina Zelenko, the Ukraine ambassador to Singapore. And Ambassador Zelenko, let's bring you back. Your observations on what we've just been hearing Samir talk about, the imperial Russia, this manifest destiny, as it was called in the US,
Russia,
of Mother Russia to take back this territory, and maybe other countries as well in the future.
Yeah, we're very much on the same page. I think the territorial expansion has always been a cornerstone of Russia's propaganda. And these imperial narratives are easy to sell to the inner audience. That's what Putin knows very well. But we also have to keep in mind that, in fact, Putin has gotten away with this type of aggressive behavior for so long. After Georgia, after occupation of Crimea, war crimes in Syria, murders in and outside Russia, and now what is happening now, looks like Putin has never paid a substantial economic and political price for that. Now the time has come.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I mean, just to add to that, Samir, very interesting point you make. At some point, the money potentially could run out, or at least they can't keep that level of funding indefinitely. The international community, there's always that nuclear element, so there won't be boots on the ground. So then you look domestically within Russia, and I come back to that mindset. How much support is there within Russia for this invasion, for this Mother Russia philosophy?
I couldn't answer authoritatively, obviously, sitting here in Singapore, but based on what we understand, some of the Russian population, they really have imbibed this message very willingly, because empires that have collapsed sometimes leave a scratch that can be itched by a leadership that says, remember our past glories, remember when we weren't humiliated, remember when we were a truly great power. There's another side to it where some of the Russian population, they don't really have the options because the standard of living might be very low. There might be a lot of poverty. So, a son or two sons go into the military. I mean, this is an honorable profession, but you may be living east of the Ural Mountains in relative poverty. What options do you really have? Final observation on this is that when you look at the map, the obvious point is Russia is still, I think, an embodiment of its imperial conquests from a different age. I mean, that's how it's so large. And that's a very, very obvious point. But that's also why there are parts of Russia in the Far East that look to China, look towards Southeast Asia, and that brings it to this region. One of Putin's gambles that has kind of worked is that the Western sanctions don't cover non-Western countries that want to keep trading with him. And that's an interesting insight into the way the world's changing. It's a bit less Western dominated than it was 20 years ago. And Putin knows that too.
Yeah. A couple of comments coming in on Facebook. Aloysius Lee, I'm praying for the Russia-Ukraine war to end very soon. Hopefully we don't see the second anniversary. Make peace, not war. Rob Salisbury, welcome back to Money FM. Mrs. Zelenko, loved your 2022 dialogue with Neil and Glenn in the early middle part of that year. Wishing you and your countrymen and women better days ahead in 2023. Well-deserved on your standing ovation at AmCham in Singapore last week. Your service to community in Singapore, cheering from Sydney. And Aloysius Lee, wondering about the Turkey-Syria quake with so many deaths. He's talking about how do we redirect money and army to help the earthquake victims? Well, that's a great point. But obviously, with so many polycrises happening, you can't necessarily take resources from one and divert it to another, even though the need is so great. What do you think about that, Ambassador?
Yeah, there are so many devastating tragedies happening in the world. And in fact, the world has not yet fully recovered after the COVID pandemic. There are so many pressing issues on the global agenda. And instead of focusing on tackling sustainable development, climate change, and many other problems, we still need to deal with the obsession of one authoritarian leader who one day decided to invade a neighboring country. So that means that maybe for us, also there's kind of rethinking. That's what I actually started my talk with you from, that we all have to realize that we live in the world where you cannot take safety and security for granted. That means either we protect today the rules-based order and the UN Charter, or tomorrow no one can feel safe.
Samir, just come on to the military aspect. I'm fascinated by your comment, this is a race against time. I was reading this week that Russia's army is estimated to have lost nearly 40% of its pre-war fleet of tanks. But of course, Ukraine's tank numbers have increased for two reasons. One, they've captured Soviet-era tanks, and of course, Western allies are slowly adding more to the fleet. However, the caveat, it's still half the size of Russia's tank fleet currently. How do you see that military hardware? Will it become a numbers game moving forward? Will it be down to the number of tanks, the number of planes that might finally end this?
Yeah, and the numbers of people as well, the number of warm bodies, regardless of the training. There's obviously the tactical aspects. It depends how you use this stuff in order to be successful on the battlefield. And Ukraine's NATO training and NATO country training is improving its capabilities, as it has been since 2015, when Britain, Canada, America started more limited training after the first Russian invasion. But I'm reminded of the warning that the US intelligence agencies sort of publicized, which was through North Korea, Russia has been gaining considerably more munitions. And when you look at the North Koreans, they've got a lot of Soviet era equipment, probably sitting in big hangars and mothballed elsewhere. Just think about the transit route. It wouldn't be too difficult to get it to Eastern Russia and send it across, to Trans-Siberian railway route, and over it goes to Ukraine. So I think the Russians are probably replenishing as well. We just don't really know about it. And the final observation on this is, I was talking to a Finnish friend of mine, also as an academic, studies military affairs. The Finns know about fighting the USSR. They know they fought bravely, they fought well back in, in World War II at the outset, but the numbers ultimately turned against them. And that, I think, is one of the big military warnings from sort of modern history, is that no matter how hard Ukraine fights, there may be a point at which retaking territory becomes very, very difficult, especially territory like Donetsk City, Luhansk City, that the Russians have occupied since 2014. It's a long time ago.
It's really a 3D chessboard, isn't it? The way all of the different moving parts here. I did read with interest just yesterday some of the 30,000 mercenaries that have been fighting with this Wagner group, the mercenary group, have either been injured or killed since the war began. 30,000. And we know that the number of traditional Russian troops as well has far eclipsed what Russia lost in Afghanistan during that incursion. We talk about the numbers game here. Samir, are you hearing anything about the talk back home in Russia about families losing their sons and just the massive? Is there any kind of internal pressure in Russia because of that, or is that just all been shut down?
So there is always internal disconnect. I mean, when sons and husbands are coming back in body bags or not coming back at all, because the bodies are being left to rot on the battlefield, of course there's going to be trauma and discontent in Russian society. In Russia's recent wars, Chechnya, Afghanistan, you mentioned, mothers groups formed quite spontaneously to try to pressure the authorities for better treatment of their family members, return of remains, and some dignified funeral services. The only issue, however, is that Russia has shown in history its ability to absorb what we would, certainly as a Brit, I would look as treasonous levels of casualties in a military operation. If you're a British or American general and you suffered this level of attrition in your combat forces, you'd probably be fired. And whereas the Russians are able to compensate for some of their military ineffective military aspects by throwing numbers of people, and some of the Wagner mercenaries you mentioned, as we know, are prisoners. Many of them are prisoners, which was seen as, in a weird way, I presume, within the sort of the Russian narrative, of finding some kind of salvation after your past misdeeds for Mother Russia. Again, the point you mentioned.
Yeah.
It goes to show how powerful those internal ideologies are, how incomprehensible they might be to us as outsiders as well.
But I mean, how far does it go, though, Samir? And I'll bring this back to the ambassador afterwards. You know, we've read appalling stories of what the Wagner Group has been doing, you know, sending prisoners out to the front lines, basically sacrificing them just to see where Ukrainian snipers might be housed. Can we have another 10? Can we have another 10? And they willingly go, well, they don't have a choice. They get sent to the front line. Okay, we've found the sniper. Body after body. I mean, we don't need to go into the atrocities here. Does this have any resonance? Does it cut through at all with the broader Russian population that maybe we're going too far now?
I mean, again, who knows how much they're actually hearing about some of those specific details. But the other thing that the sort of the antidote that Putin is giving to the disquiet is this sense of an existential conflict between Russia and the West, and turning, because all the NATO support that Ukraine is receiving is being turned into, well, we're basically fighting NATO now by proxy. So I think that is probably why the Russians are able to make that internal argument that this is a price worth paying.
Yeah, we also have to keep in mind that the length of the active front line is about 1,500 kilometers. It's
Wow.
like distance between Singapore and Bangkok. Can you
Yeah.
imagine? So it's such a magnitude.
It's huge.
And if we think that Russia lost within the Afghanistan campaign, 10 years of war, Soviet army at that time, 14,000 soldiers. And they lost in Ukraine 140,000 soldiers within 1 year, 10 times more. And we are dealing with a regime, unfortunately, that is ready to throw as much cannon fodder into this meat grinder as is needed to make a difference.
Katerina, let's leave the last word with you. We do have to go, but look, your hopes, your wishes for the future, for the next few months and going forward.
Yeah, I really hope that this year will be the final year of this war. Ukraine has to prevail because it will not only be our victory, it will be the victory of Europe, it will be the victory of the whole civilized, free world. That's what we all have to fight for. In order to make a difference and to turn the tide, we need weapons, we need financial support, and of course, we need support of so many people of goodwill across the globe who realize that the threat to one imperils the security of all. We are in the same boat and we need peace for the world.
Thank you for that, Katerina Zelenko, the Ukrainian ambassador to Singapore. Also, thanks to Samir Puri, author of Russia's Road to War with Ukraine. Much appreciate both of you coming on and sharing your insights about this on this first upcoming anniversary of the war against Ukraine by Russia. And we, of course, send our best wishes to everyone who's impacted by this. So many people are, and we look forward to having you both on for victory celebrations soon, Ukraine victory celebrations, or at least the end of hostilities whenever that may happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wide World on Money FM 89.3.
heavy departure traffic at Woodlands Checkpoint due to tailback from Malaysia. Delays are expected, and travelers are advised to check traffic conditions before embarking on their journey. Motorists are reminded to maintain lane discipline and cooperate with officers on site. Please follow ICA Facebook for more updates.
Saturday morning on Money FM 89.3. Traffic.
And there's a vehicle breakdown on the BKE towards the PIE before the KJE exit. Drive carefully there. Roadworks on Thompson Road towards SLE after Chancery Lane. Avoid the right lane. Also on Thompson Road towards the SLE after Newton Road. Avoid the right lane. On the causeways, busy. Woodlands, 1 hour into JB, 17 minutes into Singapore. And at the Tuas Second Link, 56 minutes into JB and 43 into Singapore. That's your traffic. Drive safely. Keep your eyes on the road and your ears with us right here on Money FM 89.3.
If you see anything on the roads that we might have missed, you can share it with us via SMS or WhatsApp at 8855-0893. But please send the message through only when you are safely parked. Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3.
Welcome back to Saturday mornings on Money FM 89.3, 1040 on your Singapore Saturday morning. Great segment there with the ambassador.
Really was.
And Samir Puri marking this, unfortunately, marking a year anniversary of the war against Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's very hard. I admire the ambassador so much. She never stops putting herself out there, keeping the message, as we discussed, in the news cycle, front and center. You have to. And she does it day after day. She's been doing it for a year now. I have so much admiration. It's humbling, quite frankly.
And, every time we ask her to come on the show, she says yes, no matter what, right? And she's been on several times and over this past year to give us updates on what's happening and all that. And like you say, she's just ceaselessly doing this. And, when she came on as ambassador, she didn't sign up for this particular duty, right?
No, of course not.
And she has just done a magnificent job. So thank you very much to Ambassador Zelenko and to Samir Puri for coming on.
Wide World on Money FM 89.3.
All right, welcome back in our Wide World segment right now. Let's talk about diversity and inclusion and DEI, as we all know the phrase or the term. DEI Decoded in APAC is a new research report that has just been released by Fleishman Hilliard, the public relations consulting firm. Joining us now to talk about the assessment of why and how DE&I matters to the general public across the region is Kitty Lee, the Deputy General Manager of Fleishman Hilliard, involved with this report. Kitty, welcome to you to Singapore Saturday morning from Hong Kong.
Thank you, Glenn. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Well, I have to say, diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been important. It's just in recent years, people become more aware of it. So as a communication firms, we always got questions like, what can you do for us? What strategy can you assist us in terms of communications? But at heart, we really need some data to find out what's happening. We just don't give away strategy recommendation lightly, but we want to find out what's going on, what are the needs. That's the main reason why we conduct this 5,000 respondent survey last year across Asia Pacific.
Well, I mean, it's a very detailed survey, Kitty, which we'll get into. But just for the benefit of our listeners, just briefly explain what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means in the workplace and why it's so important now, more so than ever.
Well, everyone is individual. Everyone have different needs. And especially what we have gone through in recent year and in the history, we have different background, we have different ethnicity, we have different genders, of course, and we have different status. So when we work together, coming from so different background, we have different perception, we have different knowledge level. But the most interesting thing is the diversity can sparkle new ideas. And because people have different strengths, People have different characters and personality and their experience. We come up with new ideas, creativity, and efficiency. That's the very important why diversity and inclusion is even more important in nowadays commercial entity and even for a country level.
And we're talking with Kitty Lee, who is the Deputy General Manager of Fleischmann Hilliard. They've just done a real amazing and wide-ranging survey called DE&I Decoded APAC. Talked to more than 5,000 interviewees across 10 countries looking at DE&I. And this new report sets out a framework for corporations to follow to act more relevantly and authentically in this DE&I space. But before we get to that framework, tell us about some of the top line observations that you came away with in this report.
Well, first and foremost, that is like myths. There are misperception or perception. We want to find out whether they are true or not. Is DE&I is not that important in Asia Pacific. It might be a concept more talked about in the Western world, but is it really not important in Asia Pacific? This is the core we want to find out, break the myths. And from the data, it's obvious. We see DE&I is very wanted, is in everyone's hearts across Asia Pacific. And I was amazed by the data, 84% noting that they advocate for at least one DE&I topic from the respondents. So it's not just something, it's the Western, we don't care about it, but it is really, really important. Only 1% respondents said they have never heard of this concept.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, Kitty, there are some extraordinary stats. As you mentioned there, APEC consumers, 90% of them expect companies to act and communicate about DE&I issues. But of that 90%, only 3% said they ever remembered getting any information on the topic whatsoever. So there is clearly
a massive gap,
big
right?
gap there, Kitty, right? I mean, what was some of your findings on that? Why is there such a gap?
Yeah, and on top of that, 83% expect DE&I leaders in Asia Pacific. So I think that's a fundamental situation. People look at the DE&I might be something we take it for granted, and it is not. We need to talk about it. We need to raise awareness about it so people can act about it. So it's not something that, it's okay. It's not okay if you don't raise awareness and we communicate as a team. We understand each other. It's always the three phases. We understand each other, and then we come up we've identified the needs, and then we take action. And I think usually people just understate the need to talk about it, to communicate about it, and take assumptions that, this is okay. It is not okay.
Kitty, just to add to that, if I may, because 90% is a huge number.
Yeah.
And they expect to talk about race, ethnicity, and gender. These are three key areas that they want to be communicating about in the workplace. From these respondents, did you get any sense of why they feel that this is so important to discuss, communicate about in the workplace?
Well, before we get into the why, I also want to highlight in our research, we also find out most of the respondents are not comfortable to talk about DE&I topics in workplace environment. I think that's very interconnected. So they are not comfortable talking about it, so they don't talk about it. And it's like a cycle. So this DE&I is not being communicated in the corporate world or workplace. We need to make a change, and setting up guidelines and policy. Really, as a corporate, we need to lead the change from top down and also bottom up. And so there's a lot we can do, and we have been assisting some of our clients to look at their DE&I issue internally and what they can do. And it can't change overnight. It has to be an ongoing, sustaining process. Every action counts.
But Kitty, let's get into this structure of what the framework, I should say, for what corporations can do, how they can follow in the APAC region to act more relevantly, to be authentic, to meet the needs of these 90% of people that that want to have this information available in their workplaces and have a good DE&I program. What does the framework look like?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to recognize Asia is such a diversified market.
Yeah.
We are having 4 billion people, 2,000 languages. And looking at Singapore, it's such a diversified city, a lot of different culture, ethnicity is great. But as I said at the beginning, everyone have their different needs, experience, and background. So it's very important to get together and understand each other. I want to highlight some of the very interesting data about Singapore. Singapore, is a very rich cultural and religion is very diverse. So you would naturally assume DE&I is such a easy topic on people understand, get familiar about it. However, sorry to say, you rank number 8 across the 10 markets in Asia Pacific.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So pretty low on that list, huh?
Yeah, so when we ask our respondents, are you familiar with the DE&I topic? Only 67% of the respondents say yes, they are familiar. So it's still the concept of DE&I is still having a mixed level in Singapore. And that's fascinating because I would expect, as I said, Singapore is such a diversified culture. People are like, yeah, of course, I understand that. And this result really struck me.
Wow. Well, it strikes me the contradiction that you're alluding to there, Kitty, so well, which is respondents, including Singapore, want to talk about and discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion. They want it included in corporate communication. But on the flip side, they're not comfortable talking about it. So where do we find this middle ground? What strategy can we use in the workplace to reach this comfortable middle ground?
Well, think positively, flip the lens. That means there are a lot of things we can do to upper the level. And among the 18 topics we asked our respondents, the top 3 areas that Singaporean wants to address to see the most is racism, discrimination in general, and discrimination against people with disabilities. So I think these, commonly, we are hearing from respondents, they want to see change. And so that's, as I said, it's an ongoing journey. It won't change overnight, but maybe we can start with these 3 topics that people really want to see change.
Yeah, Kitty, the report that you've put out, and I'm putting the link right now in our Facebook Live chat, so folks can actually go and look at that report. But it does cover, as you rightly mentioned, a very broad part of the world where there are many different cultures, business cultures, and otherwise. But I think fundamentally, everybody recognizes that there needs to be some change, some positive change in the amount of diversity in companies and the equity, the inclusion aspects of it. These are some, in this day and age, coming to be basic human rights, I think, that most people would think about in terms of business. Are you still seeing a lot of pushback from either certain types of businesses or certain countries, pushback against including some sort of DE&I program?
Well, I have to say our report is a very, very useful conversation opener. It is the start of the journey, and I can't decline. I can't say no. We see some hesitation. Why we need to roll out DE&I? What shall we do? A lot of question marks within corporation, but these data really help us to take the conversation to the next level and to rethink the needs, how organizations, even public sectors can set their DE&I strategy. So data is the fact.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you do have 36% of your respondents who have said they expect employee training on this subject. Would that be step number 1? start the dialogue that way. Have a leader coming, a trainer coming, and discuss these issues. Would that be the way forward?
Definitely. That is a must first step. But at the same time, I would also advocate organizations to listen to their employees. What are their needs? Because fundamentally, we need to create relevance and resonance. Trainings, yes, of course, is an education journey, but what are you going to educate? Are they listening? Are they really getting messages from these sections? I think there's a lot to do.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Kitty, the report really goes into great detail, country by country, the overview, the snapshot, and then country by country. If somebody wants to get more information from you about the report, about DE&I in their own company, how can they contact you?
I'll go to our company website, send me an email. We have thanks again. This is a global initiative. We have a dedicated true global intelligence team. They are very superb in research and analytics, and working together with our true mosaic practice. They are specialized in DE&I matters. And myself here in Hong Kong, but also I work across Asia Pacific with the teams. So definitely send us an email. We will on it.
Well, thank you so much to Kitty Lee, Deputy General Manager of Fleischmann Hilliard. The report is DE&I Decoded APAC, survey of more than 5,000 interviews across 10 countries about DE&I. Thanks for being with us today on Money FM 89.3, Kitty.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kitty.
Wide World
Bye-bye.
on Money FM 89.3.
Lau Keng Pot Singapore presents Klimt Cane Hill, a freehold luxurious condominium at Cane Hill Road, right in the city.
and providing more support for parents, families, and first-time home buyers. At the same time, the better off will be tapped to contribute more to Singapore's revenue through higher taxes on luxury cars and million-dollar properties. In travel news, Singapore Airlines named the 2023 Airline of the Year by trade publication Air Transport World. The publication lauded Singapore Airlines' rapid and decisive response to COVID-19 global travel restrictions and credited Singapore Airlines for its creative initiatives, which kept the flag carrier on a strong footing when borders reopened. Elsewhere, Europe's biggest airline, Lufthansa, started offering green fare options to travelers. These will allow customers to offset their flight emission with 20% sustainable aviation fuels and 80% contribution to climate protection projects. Meanwhile, in Turkey, where the death toll from the devastating earthquake has now surpassed 42,000 people, the conversation is now turning to what could have been done to prevent such large-scale suffering. Accusations have been made against the contractors who built some of the collapsed buildings, and more than 100 arrests have been made. In sports, video assistance referee technology makes its debut in Singapore this weekend at the Community Shield match between Albirex Niigata and Hougang United on Sunday. Referees have undergone 22 training sessions over the past year to be certified, and the technology will be used throughout the Singapore Premier League season, which kicks off next week. And that's your news wrap. You can read more at the Straits Times.
This is Money FM 89.3, Singapore's most influential radio station. Time check on Money FM 89.3.
11:03. The Met Service is calling for thundery showers over many areas in the afternoon today. A high of 33 degrees, a low tonight of 24 degrees. Much the same forecast for tomorrow. But good news is the Met Service says that we are expecting a little less rain over the rest of February. Enjoy your Saturday. That's your Money FM weather.
Traffic.
And there was a vehicle breakdown on the BKE a little earlier towards the PIE before the KJE exit, so careful there. Roadworks on Thompson Road towards Newton after Marymount Road, avoid the left lane. Also roadworks on Thompson Road towards Keng Lee Road after Moormine Road. Avoid the left lane there. On the causeways, the Tuas Second Link is a traffic jam. 1 hour and 6 minutes into JB to get that cheap petrol and potato chips. 27 minutes into Singapore. At Woodlands, 51 minutes into JB and 16 into Singapore. Remember those magic words, lane discipline.
Discipline, discipline, discipline.
At all times. And that's your traffic right here on Money FM 89.3.
If you see anything on the roads that we might have missed, you can share it with us via SMS or WhatsApp at 8855-0893. But please send the message through only when you are safely parked. Helping you grow your money on Money FM 89.3. Money FM 89.3. Financial updates from the Business Times.
I'm Chua Tian Tian with some of the market stories that made the headlines this week. U.S. retail sales rose in January by the most in nearly 2 years. According to data from the Commerce Department, the value of overall retail purchases increased 3% in the broad advance after a 1.1% drop in the prior month. That's the largest increase since March 2021. Excluding gasoline and autos, retail sales rose 2.6%, also the biggest gain in nearly 2 years. The total retail sales figure matched the highest estimate in a Bloomberg survey of economists, which had a median forecast of 2%. The reading signaled robust consumer demand that could bolster the Federal Reserve's resolve to keep raising interest rates in face of persistent inflation. And Singapore's latest 6-month Treasury bill or T-bill closed its auction with a cut-off yield of 3.93% on Thursday. The latest tranche of T-bills were around 2.3 times subscribed for the 4.9 billion Sing dollar allotment. The total value of applications in this auction was 11 billion Sing dollars, down from the 12.9 billion Sing dollars applied in the previous 6-month T-bill auction. The T-bill had attracted strong investor interest last year as yields hit multi-year highs, but interest declined in recent months after yields sales began to come down. And Singapore shares poked themselves out of the underwater territory on Friday to eke out gains, bucking losses across regional bourses. The Straits Times Index edged higher by 0.5% to cap the week at 3,328 points. The key index fell just over 32 points or 1% in an eventful week led by domestic happenings. Now, these included Budget 2023, economic data for the fourth quarter of 2022, as well as January's trade data. On the wider bourse, some 1.5 billion units worth 1.1 billion Sing dollars changed hands as losers outnumbered gainers 278 to 260. And that's your finance wrap here on Money FM 89.3. I'm Chua Tian Tian.
Those were your financial updates from the Business Times. This is Money FM 89.3, Singapore's most influential radio station. Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3.
Welcome to our 11 o'clock hour on Saturday mornings here on Money FM 89.3. It's 11:08 on your Singapore Saturday morning. The weather is okay right now, but we are expecting rain later on in the day across the island, so do be ready for that. Neil, how are you doing this hour?
I'm doing okay.
We made it through 2 hours already.
We did.
Fooled them again for 2 hours.
We did. How do we do this? How do we do it? 4 hours for me. I was here last night.
Yeah, your show's going well. How is that going for you guys now?
It's going
It's your
well.
third show?
We're enjoying it. Yeah, Dan and I. It's just
Friday nights?
It's just a simple, laid back, few laughs for the families going home from work or going out for dinner. As you know, we do a few quizzes. Just that was the week that was, and some parenthood stuff. It's just a fun, easygoing 2 hours where Dan basically makes fun of me for 2 hours, and it's fine.
I think it's gone both ways. If my listening has been,
But on that point,
correct.
how's this for a backhanded lead-in?
Yeah.
So before we went live, the other guys, it was Tim and I think Elliot.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yep. And they said, right, we've got Neil and Dan coming up. They're talking about, whatever they're talking about, parenthood, this and that. And one of them said, Neil and Dan, that's one big generational gap right there. Don't think I didn't hear. Don't think.
Yeah, that's.
But they're right. Of course, they're right. He could be my son.
Yeah.
But no, it's good fun. Good fun show.
Our last segment of our last hour about DE&I, such an important topic, and some of those stats that she was giving were quite interesting about people really want training in Singapore and across the region for DE&I from their employers.
But a very strange double-edged sword, though, isn't it? They want the training, but are still reluctant to talk about it. So they want to talk about race and culture and diversity and gender. They want to recognize and acknowledge these differences in the workplace, but not always so willing to bring them up. So we need to cross that hurdle in some way.
What does that look like? How do we make that happen?
Well, as she said, training, leaders, seminars, that's the first step, right? But then you find it a bit strange that the respondent said on the survey, yes, I want to talk about these issues, but also said, I'm not necessarily willing to bring them up in the office. So, even the most idealistic business leaders are not mind readers unless they know what you want to discuss.
Is that a challenge everywhere, though? People don't necessarily want to bring up difficult topics, right? Because it's going to mean that somebody's going to have to pay for training potentially, or that maybe things aren't going well already in the office, and that's why they're bringing up the topic to begin with.
And I also think you need to be a bit more specific. I mean, it is a very broad term, right?
Yeah.
Diversity of
Equity,
what? Of whom? What specifically are these issues in the workplace that you want to address? So maybe that's in the survey. I mean, we've posted the link on Facebook Live, the specificity of these specific issues, but fascinating.
Very good.
Singapore Homebrew on Money FM 89.3.
The National Heritage Board is marking its 81st anniversary with the return of the Battle for Singapore initiative, a series of guided talks, tours, exhibitions, and the Mint Museum of Toys has curated a special guided tour program for the Battle of Singapore as well. having a vintage toy collection from the 1940s with a special feature on General MacArthur, available the 10th of February to the 5th of March. Joining us now in the studio to talk about both of these events is Gerald Wee, the Director of International and Museum Relations for the National Heritage Board here in Singapore, and Chang Yang-fa, the CEO of the Mint Museum of Toys. Gentlemen, so great to have you both with us here on Money FM. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks very much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Good morning, everyone.
Well, thank you so much. And why don't we go ahead and start with you, Gerald? Tell us a bit about what's happening with the NHB, this 81st anniversary, and so many different things going on.
Yeah, thank you. The Battle for Singapore program is an annual program we do. This year is the 81st anniversary of the fall of Singapore. What we seek to do in these programs is to uncover hidden stories of some of the World War II sites in Singapore. We try to do this through a series of tours, talks, film screenings as well. And we find it very useful because not only does it serve as a sort of entertainment and not an education for the public, but we ourselves, in doing the research, actually find out more about these hidden gems and sites all around us. The whole intent of this program ultimately is to teach people more about the history of Singapore and also to help them to be inspired by some of these stories of resilience by our war pioneers.
Yeah. Gerald, you know what impresses me? Two things, effectively. The first thing is every year you guys keep coming up with a whole series of events. And this year you're doing everything around the 81st anniversary of the Battle of Singapore.
Yeah.
So many events. Just go to the NHB website. They're all highlighted there. The second thing is the public demand. Interest seems to be higher than ever before in Singapore's heritage sites, Singapore's history. You know, you're there at the front line at NHB. Why do you think that is? Why is there such interest now in our history and heritage?
Well, I think we are increasingly finding that people, not only do they feel or resonate, that not only does heritage resonate more with them, but as they go into it and as we do more of these tours, we do find interesting and new nuggets of information that continue to spark the interest of the public. And it's something that we do deliberately because every year, for example, it's a challenge on our site actually to find new and interesting sites that have not been covered before. I mean, it's an annual program, so we do want to ensure that we keep the content fresh. This year, for example, aside from the Mint Museum of Toys, we also have special feature tours for new sites like Fort Connaught, which have not been done before. And we think we get that public interest going.
We're talking with Gerald Wee, the Director of International and Museum Relations at the National Heritage Board, and Chang Yang-fa, the CEO of the Mint Museum of Toys. And Yang-fa, let's bring you on. And your museum just across the street from Raffles Hotel down in town is amazing. It's your own personal collection of toys that you've amassed, part of your collection over the years. But now you have a special focus on Second World War vintage toys. Tell us about what that looks like. What do you have in this special exhibit that's happening?
Well, our collection, in fact, includes a lot of historical items as well, related mainly to children. In this case, our collection features toys from, from before the war, Second World War, till after, including the occupied Japan. When the Japanese were occupied from 1945 to 52, there was a exclusive period where all the Japanese toys have to have the label occupied Japan.
Oh, is that right?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, all the toys.
Huh.
And so that makes it unique because after which they could revert back to me in Japan again. So to find such a collection or to be told about this period is interesting.
And can I ask you, Young Far, because all of the other toys that I'm aware of in the museum are yours. Is this collection also yours? Did you buy this collection?
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, this collection that you see is only a tip of the iceberg, actually. I've been collecting for more than 35 years.
And we are Money FM, so I am going to have to ask the crass question because every Singaporean listener is thinking it. Is there a ballpark figure for what this kind of collection would cost?
Well, it's hard
or the value of it.
Or the
Yeah.
value,
is value is very subjective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. I mean, recently I give you an example. I have a Popeye tank, that there are a few in the world. We have a couple of them actually in a collection, I'm glad to say. And it was auctioned off for 105,000 US.
Wow.
So because this guy wanted it so badly.
Mm-hmm.
So value is very subjective, but I see the value in my toys not so much in the monetary part of it, more in the historical value and the intrinsic value of the toys.
Oh, well, I appreciate that you're saying that, but come on, in Singapore, how much?
for a tank.
So how many actual toys in your entire collection? How many pieces do you have? Do you know that number?
I would like to say more than 50,000.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably closer to 100,000.
Yeah. And not all of them are at the Mint Museum on display, right?
By no means.
What percentage would you say is on display at any given time?
Less than 10%.
Less than
10%.
Absolutely.
I thought it was 40.
No, less than 10%.
And I know I'm not expecting you to tell us the address, but you keep the rest in a warehouse or something. Is that
warehouses.
in a storage facility?
Warehouses. Yeah. Wow, that makes sense. So there's, we can only imagine what that total number might look like in terms of value. Again, depending on the individual toys and all that. Let's bring back specifically though to the World War II toys that you have in the Battle of Singapore.
Yes.
And talk to us a little bit some of the highlights of some of those toys. What would people see if they went down to the Mint Museum and looked at that?
Yeah, I think one of them, of course, is the General Douglas MacArthur figure. That's also a very interesting.
Is it like an action
toy.
figure? What does it look like?
No, it's actually just a composition figure. I think it's mere composition. Made during that period when they were celebrating the after the war.
Mm-hmm.
So the toy company decided to capitalize on it, of course, and they made a replica of General MacArthur.
How big is it?
It's about, in terms of inches, probably around a foot.
Okay, so about 12 inches. So
Yeah,
okay.
about 12 inches.
Yeah,
about that.
I didn't know they did this. So they communicated, prestigious military figures
Oh,
after
yes,
World
yes,
War
yes.
II.
Yes, yes.
Are
In
there,
fact,
are there others that we're aware of?
We have a piece of Chiang Kai-shek as well.
Wow.
In full military regalia. Absolutely.
Which might
with
be a
the
little
sword.
more interesting for Singapore audiences,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, we do have a lot of these kind of things hidden away. Not say hidden away, but kept away until such times when it's appropriate to display them. And of course, we have a lot of the toys that were made in Japan before the Second World War. When they were actually preparing to go to war, they were actually preparing their public for their sort of campaign.
Yeah.
And you find a lot of these toys were war toys,
Mm.
not toys that you would expect that children will be playing with. You see,
Interesting.
they are, imagine machine gun toys. Children playing with machine gunners. Things in uniform, tanks. Camouflaged.
So are they kind of for propaganda purposes?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think this has been going on even in Germany as well.
Mhm.
So it's not only Japan, but of course Singapore is more related to that.
Yeah.
period. But I have also in the collection German toys, pre-war German toys, which also shows likewise. I mean, the Hitler, for example, the car that Hitler used to sit in, we have that as well.
Wow. So it's fascinating to see that even through the toys, they're trying to nurture that imperialistic mindset, that nationalistic mindset. Quite extraordinary. And I'm sure some of this is covered in the tours. You're running the tours from February, 10th of February to the 5th of March. Just give us a little oversight of what that tour is going to be like.
I think what we have there is that we have not only on display, we have also now introduced augmented reality as well. And so you will see through our QR codes and so on, certain more information than just a mere figure placed there. So the experience is going to be enhanced by all this new technology that we have introduced. Some of them are supported by the government, like NHB, of course.
Yeah.
We like to acknowledge that. And we actually appreciate that. And I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you. And
Gerald Wee is right next to you. You can't get much more of a direct thank you.
I was going to say, I'd like to thank on behalf of the whole nation, you donating an entire toy collection for us to see.
Gerald Wee from the NHB, let's bring it back to you. When you hear young Fa talk about the toys, and especially this particular period, World War II period in Singapore's history. What comes to mind about you mentioned trying to bring in different audiences and bringing history alive in different ways, and every year coming up with a lot of different programs. This would certainly be one way to attract a different audience to help them understand World War II.
Exactly. It's precisely these kinds of nuance or different nuances, that we are trying to bring out. I mean, the history books are quite clear on a lot of what happened in the past, but what is relatively unknown are these hidden aspects of the war, which are often glossed over, overlooked. We hear often also, and we also want to correct some myths. There's always the myths that the guns were pointed the wrong way and things like that. So if there's a way we can come out, do additional research through these tours, and also to let the public see these different aspects of the war, then it became a much more holistic picture of what life was like then, the challenges faced, and I think the lessons that can be drawn from there are still relevant today.
Could not agree more. As a proud history graduate myself, I've always believed that history should and can be a tactile, physical experience. If you can make it one, if you can make it immersive. The Fort Connaught tour, which I'll talk about later, is a fabulous example of that. What else have you got in that vein? Tours, exhibitions for Singaporeans during this Battle for Singapore exhibition period?
Well, we also have film screenings by the National Archives, which basically present some of the World War II related films. We have some unusual twin tours. For example, the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum is working with Reflections at Bukit Chandu to do a twin tour that looks at the it's located at Reflections at Bukit Chandu, but there's a nature tour that's twinned with it. And then the tour will then go into a tour of Reflections in Bukit Chandu, which is our interpretive center that looks at the experiences of the Malay Regiment.
It's a wonderful, wonderful exhibit that was restored about 6-8 years ago now?
Yeah, renovated. Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
We also have a sharing session by collectors like Alvin Lim from Alvin's Bunker. He's a very avid collector of World War I and World War II memorabilia. He's going to share about his collection as well as his experiences and challenges as a collector. So we try to cover these different aspects, and there are also talks that the public can go to.
And of course, people can go to the basement of the National Museum, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, there's that huge World War II area
down
there, and you're walking through all the sounds, the sirens, and all that. That's very impactful.
Anywhere at this time, the Battle Box, Fort Siloso, these are all great places to go to. The heritage trails that they've got around Sentosa and other places. This is a very good time to do it. A philosophical question: why? Why is this stuff so important, do you think?
Well, there's several levels to this. I do think there's always a value to learning about the history of your location, the people that came before you, but also to draw some lessons and inspiration, of course. But there's also a relevance today. As you're looking at the world around you today, you can see how circumstances can change very quickly. And it's, I guess, the lesson is that we shouldn't take things for granted. Things can change for very quickly, and you have to always put a priority to maintaining your defense, being prepared, and having the spirit of resilience similar to what we had in the past with our forefathers.
Of course, we just had Total Defense Day. All the sirens, I was sitting at home and all the sirens went off. Like, yep. Total Defense Day. And it was great because I turned on the TV. I mean, I knew it was Total Defense Day, but they give you all of the warnings, what each of the warnings means, what the sirens mean, what level of activity should be observed. And for a place like Singapore, that's absolutely urgent. If there were ever any threat to Singapore, we need to know immediately, and we need to know how to respond immediately. There can't be any delay.
And just on that lessons of history, you make such a great point there, Gerald, because as I mentioned to Glenn previously, they sell these newspapers, these recreated newspapers at the Battle Box. And there's one from the Times of London. There was this expat paper they sent out periodically, once every 2 weeks. And there's a special on Singapore. And it's only maybe a year before the Japanese invasion. Completely oblivious. No idea. The British Empire would have had it's all about what's happening at Raffles and this and that. They would have had no idea. So you're absolutely correct, Gerald. We ignore the lessons of history at our peril.
Yes, exactly. I give you an example. One lesson that was quite apparent is when we went into the history of that area, and when we look at the forts in Sentosa, the British were reinforcing Singapore right until the day of the surrender. You know, there were troops that came in, and these were actual battle trained troops, but they weren't able to be deployed because the advance of the Japanese was so quick that by the time they came, before they could even set up the defenses, it fell. The colony fell.
Yeah.
So the need for planning, the need to be prepared, I think that has to be underscored.
Yeah. Back to Chang Yang-fa, the CEO of Mint Museum of Toys. The toys that you have in this World War II collection, are any of them made in Singapore, or were they? You mentioned ones that were made in Japan during the occupation. What kinds of toys were actually made in Singapore during those years, or were there?
I think Singapore was in a different state at that time, being part of Britain, and I think the livelihood was more important than toys, I would say, at that time. So making toys locally are all indigenous made. It means, you know, children improvise make their own toys. So some of them we do have, yeah, but they're all not manufactured toys like what you imagine, mass produced. You know?
And what are some of those types of homemade toys, if you will, that they were making?
Things like catapults and things like that, you know, where they cut from trees. We have those, in fact, in our collection, and even things like what you call chaptek, they call it. You know,
of course.
chaptek, things like that. We have them in our so-called traditional toys.
Young
Made
Fa,
from
which is quite
feathers,
interesting, right? I mean,
very interesting.
yeah.
Glenn makes a very interesting point there. When did toy buying, toy gathering became a thing in Singapore? Because obviously, period of colony, then Japanese occupation, there's no money for toys or things like that. But you've charted almost a history of toys in your museum. When did toy ownership become a real thing in Singapore?
You mean among collectors or
Just generally?
Among the population.
Yeah, among the population.
I think I'm probably the earliest and probably the oldest toy collector in that sense.
So that maybe like the
pioneer in that
1960s,
sense.
the 1960s or 70s? Is that when people finally had money to spend on?
I think you're right,
those
Glenn.
things?
I think it's around probably more towards the 80s.
Really?
The 80s?
Yeah,
As late as that?
70s to 80s. Yeah.
Wow.
I think the media plays a big part of it, of course. You know, and in fact today a lot of collectors, what they're collecting are actually not toys. They call them collectibles.
Yeah.
You know, and then they're made to be collected, not made to be played. You see.
So based upon what you're hearing, is it really that Star Wars on period when toy merchandise becomes a really big thing? Because I know you have some fantastic Star Wars originals, and when I spoke to you about it before, I wouldn't say you were sniffy about it, but you was not. There were other toys in the museum that impressed you more. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think so, because I think the Star Wars toys was a period of where, you know, George Lucas actually brought toys to the main public by producing cheap toys.
Toys for the masses.
For the masses.
Yeah.
Which actually sort of takes away the so-called beauty of toys itself, you know, vintage toys, because it becomes accessible to everybody. And everybody can own a toy, and they're mass produced in thousands. So that makes it very common and not valuable. I underestimated it today. In fact, Star Wars collection are worth millions.
Exactly.
Nicolas Cage, in fact, auctioned off his collection. Would you believe it?
Is that right?
Yeah. It went for a lot of money.
Was there a period when toys were manufactured in Singapore?
Yes.
Yeah. What was being made here, and when was that?
I think there used to be a blue box factory just across the road here.
Oh, really?
Where the Yellow Pages
yes.
used to be here.
Opposite Bredo MRT.
Yeah. This was
Blue
Blue
Box. What is that?
Is the name of the toy manufacturer. It was actually, I think, a Hong Kong company. They set up a factory here. And I think Corgi, the British English toy company, also made some toys here as well. So I have those in the collection.
Really?
Yeah. I in fact, I specifically sort of sought out toys that are made in Singapore specifically, you know, and it's very hard to find them. Because a lot of people tend to collect toys from Japan, you know, they're more so-called valuable, you know, collectible. So for Singapore, it's something like very obscure. And where is Singapore? A lot of them may not even know at that time. So a lot of these toys were all thrown away. So it's very difficult to find these toys. But there are some made here. They are mainly cheap plastic. toys.
Mhm.
And when I say cheap, they are also fragile. So that means they are actually difficult to find.
Still another potential tour there, Gerald. I think Singapore-made toys. I would certainly go along. I would certainly go along.
Gerald, Jane Iyer from Jane's Singapore Tours is commenting on Facebook Live. She said, great to see the NHB tours to commemorate the 81st anniversary of the fall of Singapore, but it's almost impossible to get tickets.
And I have to echo Jane's point. She's not the first to say that. I mean, popularity is a good thing, but they were snapped up quick.
What is your feeling on that? I mean, you know, surely you have seen the popularity of this.
Yes.
Any thoughts to expand and to try to address that?
Yeah. So every year, in fact, we have been expanding the program almost every year. This year, for example, we have 30 unique types of programs, 19 of which are new, which we've not done before. The challenge for us often is the site limitations. If, for example, some of the sites can only take tour sizes of a certain capacity. We also have challenges in terms of access. One of the great aspects of the program is that it gives the public chance to go into places that they cannot normally go to, like, for example, special access places that you need special permission for.
Yeah.
But that permission cannot be granted in total, all the time.
Such as Fort Connaught.
Yeah, such as Fort Connaught. So we do have to restrict, and there's only a certain number of, there's 24 hours a day only, you know, there's only a certain number of tours you can do during that period where we have those approvals. We do want to talk to our partners to see whether some of these tours can be done and made permanent, but of course, those are discussions that are always ongoing.
It's funny, earlier this week, Neil had a chance to go to the media opening, the media tour of Fort Connaught over in Sentosa. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But earlier this week, I reached out to PR folks and I said, hey, I'd really like to go and see Fort Connaught this week sometime if I can, before we have you on this weekend, you know, so we can have a chat. And the reply came back almost immediately, cannot. Everything's booked up. We got no space for you. I'm like, well, wait a minute, we're doing a story on it. But just to give you an idea, it's packed, it's busy, and like you say, limited time that people can actually physically are allowed to go in there. So.
And we do understand our partners have their constraints too. But what we have found through these programs is that people are actually willing to go above and beyond sometimes to do more of these tours. But there will always be a limit, and there will always be a challenge there.
Are there videos made of any of these things? Like, let's say the Fort Connaught tour. You know, will there be an online experience that people can maybe at some point take part in it?
Oh yeah, we are exploring that. And there are some technical challenges to that, of course. But having said that, it is something that we hope to do in future, to put some of these, make these tours virtualized, put them online after the tour so that the public can still go
for the seniors, for the young kids, for the whomever.
Because to your point, it's not only demand, there are safety aspects. As someone who has done that tour, there are slopes and slips involved. It's quite precarious. So certain folks couldn't do it, and the numbers really do have to be controlled.
Managed.
It's not Disneyland. It can't be a free for all. Yeah.
Last question for you.
What's next?
Well, over the years, as we look at the Battle for Singapore programs, next year there will be another one. We haven't quite decided what angle to use for that, but we try to look at it from both the air, land, and sea aspects. So this year, for example, it's primarily the sea aspect, focusing on Fort Connaught. Last year, it was the air aspect when we did an installation at 179 Piccadilly in Seletar. That used to be the former RAF base at Seletar, which was then taken over by the SAF thereafter. But these different aspects are something we are trying to look at, and it depends also on the partners that we are able to get on board. But we always look for these interesting news sites. So keep tuned to this.
And the final point, the feedback is positive. Whatever number of tours you've got planned, double them.
Is it true? I read somewhere that Seletar was the first international airport in Asia in the 1920s when the RAF first started it. Have you heard that?
I believe it might have been, but I'm not sure.
I know Kallang Airport.
Was
one of the most
exactly. Whether it was the first, I'm not sure.
In the 20s, I heard it was the first somewhere.
Right,
but I'd like to confirm.
There's something about Kallang Airport that's ringing bells about being one of the first commercial airports, certainly for the British Empire. I'll have to check that.
Interesting.
Jane Iyer is listening. I'm sure she knows.
Yang Feng, any final comments from you about toys and marking this anniversary and just going forward?
Well, we have a lot of programs lined up as well, if I,
Yeah.
for the year. So I think I just want to, urge the public to keep a lookout for all these programs. There'll be more interesting plans we have ahead. And we're working very closely with NHB, of course, to coordinate all these programs.
And you told me off air briefly that you've recently renovated
Yes,
the museum.
correct.
So what have you changed?
We have actually introduced a lot of new technological aids so that they make the experience more, I would say, proactive and more, I would say, friendly, IT friendly.
Nice.
Yeah. And also people can actually have a better experience. And I hope at the end of the day, as I always tell all my visitors, when you leave the place, you have a free souvenir, which is the Mint experience.
Yeah.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back.
There you go. Chang Yang Fa, the CEO of Mint Museum of Toys, and Gerald Weed, Director of International Museum Relations at the National Heritage Board. Thanks to both of you for coming on to talk to us about all these great exhibits and tours. We really appreciate it and hope you'll come back again.
You're
Thanks very
welcome.
much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
informative seminars, and submit your application to win shopping vouchers. Places are limited, so register now at idp.com/Singapore.
Traffic.
And the causeways are gridlocked at Woodlands Causeway. It's 1 hour and 1 minute into JB, 17 minutes into Singapore. At the Tuas Second Link, 1 hour and 1 minute into JB. They're having a competition. And 25 minutes into Singapore. How are we doing on the roads? There are roadworks all over the island, particularly in Thompson Road. Drive carefully there. And in the Newton Road, lots of traffic there. There's been a vehicle breakdown on the SLE towards the CTE before Woodlands Avenue 12 exit. And another vehicle breakdown on the TPE towards the PIE after Passer Risk Drive 12 exit. Avoid lane 3. Drive carefully. Keep it right here. Money FM 89.3.
If you see anything on the roads that we might have missed, you can share it with us via SMS or WhatsApp at 8855-0893. But please send the message through only when you are safely parked. Saturday morning, only on Money FM 89.3. International News Review.
And we are back with our closing 15 minutes or so of the show. Wow, how fun to talk to Gerald and
Great guys.
Yeah, those guys are just Young Fa. What a character, huh?
Young Fa is one of the great Singaporeans.
The CEO of Mint Museum.
Of the Mint Museum of Toys. I've written about him in my book.
Right.
I think it's a great story. Self-made, successful engineer, semi-retired. He could do whatever he likes with his money. He's well earned.
Yeah.
He bought that property out of his own money. He designed the shape of the building
Is that
because he's
right?
an engineer. Absolutely. Every toy in that collection is his. As he mentioned, it's only ever 10%. So if you visit that museum regularly, you constantly see different toys because he rotates his collections. And I'm pretty sure I've got this right. It's he said this publicly before, but it's in his will that it will be a gift to the nation. I mean, that's just extraordinary generosity.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of philanthropy is. I mean, he's far too modest, but common sense tells you that the exhibition, the toys, worth millions.
Very humble guy. Very just
Lovely guy. So get down, just to recap, the Second World War vintage toy collection with a guided tour with a special focus and feature on General MacArthur is ongoing now until the 5th of March. Get your tickets at NHB.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Awesome. What do you got going on this weekend?
I'm just writing, basically. I've got to do what I'm supposed to do in this life, and I'll be writing today and tomorrow. It's been a very hectic time. And about to get more hectic.
Hecticer?
Hecticer. What about you?
You know what? This weekend is actually going to be fairly calm.
That's good. We're calm.
Yeah, it's going to be a relaxing afternoon today. You know, after we finish the show, we got to get the podcast and the vodcast together and all that. There's a lot to do with that, but I just try to take it easy sort of in the afternoon. Tomorrow, my wife and I have agreed, we've made a calendar date with ourselves to start working on our taxes.
I've just done mine this week.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Aren't you good?
That's late for me. I usually do it in January. I hate it.
I know,
hate it.
right?
I hate it.
I know.
My brain is just not wired that way. I loathe all forms of admin, form filling, number counting. I have an art. What is it? Left brain, right brain? I don't know. I've got a creative arts brain. I'm very proud to have that brain. But the other side of it, it could not interest me less.
Yeah.
The receipt gathering, the form. I have an accountant, and she does it, but I've still got to compile everything over the year. You know?
Well, and look, God bless the IRAS because they make it as easy as it possibly can be. It is like honestly, it is almost a pleasure to do taxes here versus the US and other places where it is so complicated.
Australia just defies belief.
It's like, what are you kidding me? But here it's easy. And whenever I've had questions over the years and I've gone in, to up to the office, the main office, they couldn't be nicer, more helpful. Sometimes they'll actually sit and help you fill out the forms. Like they just want to help you get it done, right?
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate that. But the actual act of getting it done is drudgery for me, like it is for yourself.
Yeah, I've done it now, but yeah, it's there. It's always at the back of my mind. It's coming, and so I have the TV going in the background, but it's no fun. I mean, I honestly, I'm that kind of guy. I would rather clean the bathroom. I would rather wash dishes. I really, truthfully, I'd rather do manual labor. There is nothing.
I'd rather do anything.
Literally anything.
Clean that sock drawer. Organize that sock
seriously.
drawer. Right?
I could listen to a podcast while I do that. That's fine. But there's something about number crunching, and some people love it. My accountant lives for it, and God bless him.
Yeah,
because it's not for me.
We were gonna talk about Fort Canut, but maybe we'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, we'll save it.
Can we do that?
We'll save it.
So just a little presage. You went to Fort Canut. You went on the tour for the media,
and I had a presage. I just like that word, presage.
But tell us, just give a brief overview.
Brief overview. It's kind of like stepping into a Indiana Jones, Lara Croft kind of world.
Wow, okay.
It feels very authentically real because the ruins are still amongst the trees and the forest. So it has a real Tomb Raider kind of feel. And I completely understand why Gerald said, this cannot be Disneyland. It can't be Fort Siloso, because you want to preserve, and full credit to our friends at Sentosa, who we have on this show many times, our good friend, the CEO.
Yeah.
They're very serious now. I've spoken to these guys, as have you, separately, officially, off the record. They're not just playing lip service. I get a sense from the top brass at Sentosa that they really get it now about Sentosa's green value. They don't want to chop down anything else at this point if they don't have to.
Yeah.
And that would include Fort Connaught. To make it accessible in the way that Siloso is, you'd have to chop down quite a bit of the forest around it. Yeah. And without spoiling it too much, it's not as big as Fort Siloso. So it wouldn't necessarily be worth it either. But yeah, as a historical site, fabulous.
Awesome. Well, let's have a look at that next week on the show coming up. All right, everybody. Well, we're going to let you go for now, but I hope you have a great rest of the day. Remember, it is supposed to rain a little bit later on. Let's hope it doesn't, but Singapore probably will. So do be careful, especially if you're driving. And masks are off if you want them. Are you observing? On off.
Right, very quickly. Yep. Very funny. First day I took my mask with me and the bus was about 50-50 and I put it back on. It was peer pressure. I didn't want to be the token rebellious Angmo, so I put it back on. And then I have this stupid thing that makes no sense at all.
What do you mean?
When I get on the bus, I put it on as if to give face to the driver. Say, look, I got it on. Then I go upstairs and I take it straight off. So there was no purpose to this. The last two buses, interestingly, the drivers weren't wearing masks.
Oh.
Because they don't have to either now.
Sure.
So I thought, well, if he's not, I don't have to. I get on the MRT and I do this quick spot check. If I see more than 50, 60%, I put it on. I thought, no, this is getting ridiculous. You're a grown man. Just make a choice.
You're so swayed by public opinion.
I know. Sheep. I am a sheep. I'll be bleating next.
All right, folks. Well, we want you to be safe and healthy no matter who you are, where you are, what you're doing. So do what you need to do. And whatever you do, come back and join us again next Saturday.
And as always in life, maintain lane discipline.
Discipline.
That is a philosophy for life.
And tune in next Friday night at 7 p.m. for Neil and Dan Coe's Friday night show, too.
Where we never maintain lane discipline.
There you go. All right.
See you next week, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
You're cruising through your weekend on Money FM 89.3.
Money FM 89.3.
Lau Keng Huat Singapore presents Klimt Cane Hill, a freehold luxurious condominium at Cane Hill Road, right in the city.